So welcome, everyone. So we are on the third floor of the building. So in the case of an emergency, we can go out this door here and kind of either direction. If the elevators aren't working and you need one, there is an area of refuge right near the elevator, or we can go down the steps and out. Any agenda changes? Hearing none, we'll keep it as is. Open to the public for items not related to the agenda. We have one in the room. Do you want to state your name?
My name is Loretta Marriott. I wrote what I wanted to say, so I wouldn't get all befuddled. I live on Mills Avenue in the Chamberlain neighborhood. Hi to the Planning Commission, and thank you all for the work that you do for all the folks in South Burlington and beyond. I know it's a lot of work and I appreciate everything that you guys do. My main mode of transportation is my electric bike and I love it. I'm pretty observant, and of course, there's some things I see and I wonder about from time to time. One of the things I wonder if the South Burlington zoning regulations officially allow airport use of the R4 area along the west side of the end of White Street. And that would be it's the west side away from Williston Road. So it's that end.
Is that where the dog park is?
The north
Was?
side of White Street. The north, yeah.
It's
So where the phone.
actually at the very end of Airport Drive, which is the road that goes right in front of the airport. You go
The
down
cell phone
to
lot.
the end. White Street takes off to the left and you go a little bit further. And there's probably 200 cars in there with probably 20 different red states represented. And some for sale signs on the cars.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
What's their cell phone lot? This what, right, Helen?
No, it's the other side of the street on the cell phone.
Yeah, that sounds like rental. Are the rental companies putting cars down there?
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh,
Okay.
If it's a commercial, are they paying commercial taxes?
So I remember, if I'm right, the South Burlington City Council approved airport use of land inside the airport's fence, kind of in general. And, you know, when I read about that, I thought, okay, the logical next step, of course, would be to move the fence out to allow for more use with less scrutiny. And so my question is this parking area that the airport is using for multiple purposes allowed in zoning? Is it zoned properly? And are they using it properly? I have maps.
No, I think you've stumped us.
Yeah, I don't know off the top of my head.
Yeah.
So I am looking at a zoning map. It is not zoned R4. It's zoned airport, those lots.
So let's see. if I can
Pull it up.
Here is my map. Can I show you my map?
Sure.
Yeah.
I think Kelsey's gonna also try to pull it up on the screen, so it's easier to share.
Share with, I'm trying to pull it up online. You can share with
Yeah.
the commissioners.
We could maybe pass it around.
Okay, so that's Airport
Yep.
Drive,
Mhm.
and this is the place where they're parking.
Right
their
there.
Cars, yeah.
Okay, so she just said the blue is Airport Drive
Yep.
and the spot here where she said cars
Yep.
is the spot.
And White Street is white.
Yeah.
Okay, White Street is right. That is a very helpful
I've
map.
seen it, excuse me. I've seen it around there, I've seen those spots, but the dog park is back here.
That was.
Well, the older.
Yeah.
The old dog park.
Yeah, it's right beyond where you turn left on White Street.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you
that's
do see
correct.
cars there all the time.
All right in here. All these houses are gone except for two.
All right, it looks like Kelsey's gonna help
That's
us
two more.
zoom in.
Yeah. There you
Yeah,
go.
there it
So-
is.
You can highlight it.
Okay, you can kind of see the,
To the
To the zoning districts.
the west
So it is zoned
airport.
airport.
So if you're talking about this area,
Yeah.
it's zoned airport.
Yeah.
So Loretta,
Yes,
so
ma'am.
Loretta, so Kelsey has it up on the screen there. It looks as though the white is the spot you're talking about. You can kind of see the cars under there, and the white is
Airport.
airport zoning. And the yellow kind of gold is the R4. So it does look as though the cars are being parked on the airport zoning area.
Okay. You can't see this picture if you're online.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Helen, for pointing that out.
How about now, Helen?
Yep, yes.
So I think your technical question was about the zoning district, and it seems as though that technically it is the airport district. So I mean, I don't know about other things like, you know, dimensions or setbacks, or, you know, we didn't talk about any of those things tonight, so there might be something going on there that's not according to the rules, but
The appropriate.
the zoning, the zoning is airport zoning there. Not R4. Did you have any follow-up question? Okay. Any other items from the public not related to the agenda?
Yeah, I got something.
Isaac? you wanna go ahead?
Yeah, I'm Isaac Bissell. I live in the Chamberlain neighborhood as well. I was calling in because I'd understood that there might have been some level of discussion. I'm not sure if it's on the planning commission or outside at the city staff level about straightening the airport fence around Kirby Road, which would result in about an acre or plus of additional area within the fence line. And I'm just concerned about that sort of airport encroachment on the neighborhood, especially without public input and after the airport said they weren't interested in expanding out in that direction. And so I guess I'm wondering, has anyone on this, has there been any discussion of that? Has anybody heard anything about that? Is that something that's coming?
Do you want me to clarify?
Is there a way to have us not rebroadcast?
So I think somebody has their speaker on. I don't know who it is that's then picking it up in a, it's nothing I can fix on my end. So Isaac,
Okay.
there's discussion at the last meeting or two about a green buffer of about 300 feet, give or take, and narrowing at one end. Between the existing neighborhood and the potential location of a realigned airport parkway. That is in line with both
Yeah.
what it's both what the city council had provided as feedback to the airport in 2016 and is and I'll follow up why this is true, and it's responsive to the airport rezoning task force recommendations from last winter. And that is because what it would also do is keep the remaining area to the east and north and northeast of that line as the area to be considered in a community-driven planning process. That would happen after the comp plan. It would happen likely over the course of at least a year. It would be couched in public meetings, etc. But one thing that was discussed at a previous meeting was there is a bit of a zigzag, and I'm wondering if it's shown in this zoning map easily. Yeah, so I'll share this again, the zoning map.
And I guess just to be clear, this is actually directly applicable to our agenda tonight. So
Yeah.
it may or may not be the right time to talk like in great detail, but I think we can answer
Yeah.
his question
Yeah.
now and then.
So Isaac, can you see the zoning map?
And
He's good.
Isaac, you're on
Yes.
mute.
Voice muted,
His
okay.
voice-
I mean, I don't have time to attend the whole meeting and there's no other point for
Yeah,
public comment.
We're answering your
I'm
question.
trying to answer your question now, Isaac. So if you can see my cursor, there's this zigzag here in the zoning map. Where the white
Yeah.
is currently the airport zoning and the orange is R4. The discussion that, and this, if you can see is very faintly, the airport fence kind of zigs.
I can see it.
Okay, so the discussion that was had last week as a potential option to put into the future land use map of the city plan would be to allow the airport to change not the zoning, because that's not the process that we're in, to change the future land use map to swap this little corner here with this area over here. So it's not actually, we haven't done the exact math on it, but it would not actually be losing land that is in the community-driven planning process. It would be just straightening out the fence across this little corner here. And then putting.
Yeah, so that's an extremely intensely used area for recreation that you're talking about taking. So just an FYI, that's gonna get fought and I think you're gonna lose. And so I would encourage you to reconsider that plan because we will organize in the neighborhood. We're fully capable of doing the whole organizing we did around the rezoning and doing it again. It's a bad plan. It will result in the loss of recreational area.
Isaac, I was just clarifying what was discussed at the prior meeting. If you have substantive comments, we are discussing the commission, not me. The commission will be discussing the future land use map later in this agenda.
Yeah, and I think, I think no one's trying to do anything secretively and, unless we talk about it, then there's no change or no public dialogue. So, I don't think this is like a us versus them, something someone has to fight. It's open for discussion and, that's the process we're in. And the future land use map is not zoning and it doesn't change like uses, but it kind of opens up areas for discussion, which is what we're going to be talking about in more detail later in the meeting, when I think we should really be talking about this as part of the agenda item.
I agree. I just have one.
Yeah.
Just want to say, Isaac, I appreciate you bringing this to our attention and bringing forward concerns about what's being discussed. This is the first I've heard about it. And I like to be solution oriented, so I would love to hear more from you about your concerns and what might be a better solution. So thank you for bringing it forward.
Yeah, great.
Thank you.
Okay, anything else not related to the agenda? Okay, and you can unmute if you're joining us online. So I think at this point we can move on to announcements and staff reports. Does anyone have any announcements? Any staff items? Okay, then we can move into our city plan 2024 updated sections. So in our packet, we have some updated language on multiple sections. These are ones that we have seen in the past, given some initial feedback on, which has been incorporated. And then also each of the sections has had some additional input from the committees and city staff, which was provided as kind of information in the packet. You could see the comments that were received from the committees. And staff has helpfully helped get that information kind of into the sections, which is kind of part of what we're reviewing today. So if you're seeing something that feels kind of out of context from our last discussion and or the committee input, I think those are things we want to focus on and try to kind of focus on policy items that would be things to be changed. So, if you agree with something, it's probably, and it's in there, we can not talk about that to try to save some time. And like you'll also see, I guess, on the agenda, we have the future land use areas and the future land use map on the agenda as well. So I want to make sure we've saved enough time to talk about those items, which are ones that are kind of for first discussion. So trying to be pretty efficient with this first part of the meeting. The idea is that we'll look at these tonight, give some kind of policy level suggestions if needed. And then the goal is to have our first meeting in July is when we'll have like the whole comp plan draft to look at together, you know, so we'll have additional input at that point, as well as it would be kind of advertised for public comment at that point too. So, and we'll have many weeks for, you know, additional discussion on our end and kind of collecting and kind of responding to public comment at that point. So it isn't our last chance. And, you know, so if there's some wording that's weird or, you know, typos or things like that, maybe we can just try to focus on the bigger things so that we have something ready for public comment. And we will have time at our next meeting to kind of look at, I know, Laura, you had specifically brought up at our last meeting, we want to be able to have time to look at the intro sections. So that's on our next meeting agenda. And if we need to carry over some of the land use discussion from tonight, we might be able to put that on the next agenda too, but it'd be nice to try to get through what's in here. Anything else, Kelsey, before we?
No, I think that lays it out. As you mentioned, that Lori had mentioned, you'll see the introductory language and the sort of bringing it all together kinds of language, how it's organized, what order it's in, all of that at the June 27th meeting. And that would also be an opportunity to do things like, oh, a section is included in this section, but it should be in this section, some of that reorganization. Something comes to mind, community gardens is currently in the environment section. It could as easily be in the recreation section or something else. So things like that, you could move subsections around easily. So that would be your chance. The next meeting, the 27th, is your chance to, is your first look at the full document with the intention that the draft that you would be looking at again on the first meeting in July would incorporate any edits from the last meeting in June, and then would be a static draft. So the the draft that you'd be seeing in July would be the same as the 2 meetings in July and at least the first meeting in August. So members of the public are not kind of shooting at a moving target. That's the intention. And then the other intention is one of those 3 meetings would be a public listening session, a public comment session or something of that nature. It wouldn't be a public hearing because that's kind of later when we're finished with the draft, but to have a meeting that is dedicated to public comment instead of trying to kind of fit it in amongst commission discussion. I mean, public is always able to comment at any of the meetings, but it's nice to know, like, here's the big one that if you can only make it to one meeting, you could bring up anything at that meeting as a member of the public.
Is there any chance that you could get to us parts of the 27th package ahead of time? So if you have some of it that's ready, you could get to us so we can start reading, because it's massive amounts of stuff to get through in 3 days for me.
Yeah,
And
so
if you have the draft of the introduction page done early or any other section, could we see that before the packet goes out?
I can try. It is a week from now, so it's not very long even to get it sort of early. It's still not a terribly long amount of time for me. I will say that most of the stuff in the full draft packet will be the sections that you've seen and the edits that you have recommended to those sections. So I'm hoping that the only thing that's new would be the very first.
Okay.
The very first and possibly like a conclusion very last. So it won't be like a 100-page document. It'll be like a 5-page, 10-page thing to review. But I will do my best, as I have been, to get it as soon as possible.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Oh, Paul Ingalls?
Are we having a joint meeting with the city council in July?
Not
No,
that
no,
I
no.
know.
17th.
We are, I'm not sure that that is a
17th of
joint
which month?
meeting. It's, so,
It's news to me.
That's
Um,
totally news to me.
I think from what I heard, there's an opportunity at your meeting on the 17th to give you an overview of our process. I do not know that that is considered a joint meeting or not. I have that.
That's-
Helen has not communicated that it's a joint meeting. It was an update.
Maybe we
So
should-
Yeah,
Helen is on, so.
Yeah.
I
know.
don't think there's a formal one planned, although we did talk about it. And then I think your schedule and our schedule got pretty busy. So it's not a firm,
Maybe.
Yeah, does that answer your question, Paul?
Yeah, and our meeting is on the 24th. 10th and 24th are our meetings.
That sounds right.
The second, fourth.
Yeah, that
Tuesday,
does
yeah.
sound
Tuesday,
right.
yeah.
Yes, the 10th and the 24th in July, Paul.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, no, the 11th and the 25th,
11th and 25th, okay,
Tuesdays. Yeah, the
Tuesday.
Tuesdays are the 11th and the 25th.
yep, okay.
Okay.
it's a possible.
I think we heard from Helen, it's an update and not a,
Yeah, I mean.
not a joint, a full joint meeting. So I guess with that, you know, we have these different sections. So maybe we can just briefly look at each of the five, and see if there's any kind of big policy comments, big things missing. So the first one's the community, history and culture.
I had a question under the actions.
Mhm.
I didn't know whether, around culture, it would be, I think it would be useful to create, an indigenous history map and inventory as an action item. For South Burlington's prehistory. Because this is talking about the culture and the history of this area, and it's pretty scant on that. I was thinking that might be a really useful thing.
I had a suggested addition to the paragraph about which starts with recognizing history. And it's in part what University of Vermont has in their documentation. It says the Western Abenaki people have inhabited this land called Ndakina, which I think in their language meant the territory, for thousands of years. The very land now called South Burlington was a crucial center for the indigenous people, especially the area known to them as the Plains, stretching east from what is now Burlington to the airport and along the Winooski River and its tributaries south to Shelburne Pond. The Abenaki stewarded the resources they received in their homeland and still honor the inherent natural spiritual values of the earth, water, animals, and plants. The Abenaki are an abiding inspiration and a conscience for all people living in this region today. Sort of an acknowledgement of who they were, where they were, and what we owe them.
It seems pretty reasonable to add to the text and then
I
also
like
the
that.
follow up with the action. like you
Yeah, I think
suggested.
the action. And
It's also kind of nice because it's new information. You know, it
Yeah.
actually defines an area. It's like, oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I also,
That's-
on that
that's-
paragraph that you were referring to, have a suggestion that that paragraph get moved to the top of this section. Because that's the beginning of our history right there.
Okay.
And it seems like that would be appropriate to lead with.
Michael, which paragraph were you adding it to?
It's
Paragraph.
in the third paragraph of, it's after the third paragraph of the historic sites and structures.
On page 2, third paragraph.
Okay, any objection to those? Seems like
Uh,
good complementary. And then, Paul, do you want to go ahead?
Well, our history doesn't begin there. It goes back at least 12,000 years to when Lake Champlain was the inland sea. And there were native peoples who hunted for whales through here. And South Burlington, our topography here was very much, the beaches of the inland sea. It's pretty interesting archaeological stuff that we could probably also get from UVM.
So if available, maybe a sentence on the inland sea as well as what Michael was suggesting. That makes sense.
It's interesting that there were native peoples in gigantic, whaling boats that hunted whales along our shores here.
Michael, if you could email that paragraph to me, that was,
It's in what I
it's what you
think.
sent earlier.
Yeah.
I didn't get a chance to. read it.
Okay, Donna, did you want to
Um,
add to that?
no, I think those are interesting things and good background and should be there. What I wanted to comment on was the paragraph right before cross-cultural activities. Because it's very nicely recognizes that the city supports and requires public art in new construction and redevelopment. What we've never actually recognized and is the value of high quality climate responsive design in the buildings and architecture that are created here. And I think it would be, this building establishes a really good, high quality standard. And yet some towns in the United States have kind of really distinguished themselves by requiring high quality design and I'm adding this because of the climate crisis that is climate responsive. And that's just a suggestion to add to the, because not all art is just visual art. Buildings themselves are an art form in a way. But in our climate, we haven't always thought of it that way. And yet, as we get into climate issues, this building has done a superb job of educating people as to what you should expect. And I think it would be good if we incorporated that so that, all the development starts to, begins to consider those issues. And at least addresses it in terms of when they're presenting a design, that we can say, how is this building climate responsive and how is it addressing the climate crisis that we're in?
Absolutely.
I'm very much in favor of what Don is saying, but not in this section.
I was gonna say, it sounds like it would belong in either housing
I
or
mean, it should
energy.
be where we talk about climate mitigation and climate resilience,
But I
because
didn't-
this is culture. and
I
history.
didn't want to focus on the climate part, though. I
I
wanted
do.
well, I know, but we're doing a lot of that already. But I think this is one place where we're talking about art and so often, I was very interested when we were having all the discussions about the east-west crossing. That people failed to see that design was artistic. That, that bridge is kind of a work of art, and God help me, I don't know where it is right now, where the design stands. But, I was so pleased that, that we were actually gonna look at something that wasn't just, plain old structure, that, that this was actually an artistic statement. And it's more along that lines of what I'm intending here, that we do look at, that we look at development as architecture, not just as buildings.
Yeah, and you're suggesting that we also look at architecture as art. Which
Well,
in some sense it is.
Yes.
Yeah, which feels like that fits here, especially when you're talking about the broader aesthetics.
Yeah, that we
Right.
shouldn't have to be subjected to really boring developments, when
So what
No.
kind of language could we put in here?
But I think the key thing is tied the aesthetic to the climate resiliency, climate. With the building, I think that's the key piece that. Donna's thinking.
Yeah, I added, the way I did it is I just, after the words, the city supports and requires public art,
Mhm.
then I inserted, and high quality climate responsive design in new construction and redevelopment. And it was just adding a few words, but I think it establishes what the intent is.
I think that's
And high quality.
See, I don't separate artistic and climate responsive. To me, they're sort of integral. I think Lori probably agrees with that.
I do. And I'd love to see one other quick section added on the first line of this paragraph. Where it says we have a wealth, have residents from a wealth of cultures from around the world. I'd like that to read from across time and around the world. Because we have, again, speaking to the indigenous history of this area, which still exists. And at the very end of it, where it says, connect neighbors and support our new American. I'd like to see it say, and Native American populations. Because we do have Abenaki residents living.
I'm fine with adding and new and Native American populations to the end. I
Yeah.
don't think it's accurate to add it from across time. Because they are modern
Okay.
people.
Mhm.
All human cultures have a fairly similar time span. They're just a bit in different places. It doesn't quite make sense to me, but
Unless you're a big fan of ghosts, in which case I understand.
that's a different issue.
I've never met one I didn't like. Because I've never met one.
So, I wasn't super clear about, so we're gonna try to have as much planning commission discussion as possible to be able to like move through this, and then I'm gonna open it up for public comment before we move away from each chapter. Is that okay, Lorna? I know you have your hand up. I'm not trying to ignore you. I just want to, I hadn't really like mentioned that process for this evening.
Just be a quick little.
Okay, sure.
Respecting the heritage. So like environmental respect is also respecting the heritage of our folk.
Great comment. Thank you. Okay, anything else on this section? Or any other public comment on this section before we move to the next one?
I had a question on cross-cultural activity where we've used the term new Americans
Mhm.
rather than immigrants. I'm always in favor of plain speech that people are familiar with, and new Americans sounds a bit like a euphemism for immigrants. An immigrant population.
It is the term that is more commonly used in policy now because of the unfortunate negative connotations that some groups of people place on the word immigrant.
But we don't have to.
And it also includes families that are not like children who were born here, but whose parents emigrated from
Children who
somewhere
are
else.
born here are Americans, not new Americans. I'm a new American,
Sure,
but I'm an immigrant. And
sure.
I think it's very, immigrants have done more than any other, we're all immigrants, but immigrants have done more than any other people to advance this country in so many ways, culturally, technologically, you name it. Immigrants have done it all. So I'm very much in favor of sticking with immigrant and not following some new politically correct dictate. It just doesn't sit well with me. It sounds like a euphemism to me.
The other issue with no Americans is there are a lot of people here who aren't Americans yet. Who are living here, who are culturally part of all of this. If they haven't been naturalized at
The
this
term,
point.
yeah, right. The term new American does not is not distinguished on citizenship.
Okay.
Or residency. Or legal status.
Right, so. Seems like maybe,
I will,
I would stay with, I think new American is fine. I would stay with it. I would not use the word immigrant.
Well, maybe this
I've
is
had my
something to
say.
keep an ear, yeah, maybe this is something to keep an ear out for during public comment too, you know, if we're hearing any kind of comments one way or the other, maybe we make a decision at that point.
It's being aired now, so.
Okay.
it's-
Okay, so moving on to natural resource protection and conservation. Any commissioner items on this one?
I'll let somebody else go. Very quick. In the
Okay,
very first sentence, the world is facing, I've added an existential climate crisis, because it really is. And in the third line, I think there's a word missing, natural resource protection serves both climate resiliency, not natural resource serves. I think it should be natural resource protection serves both.
oh yeah, I think it just has the word.
It just says
protect.
protect.
Yeah.
Protection.
Anyone else, any other commissioners on anywhere in the whole section? This is a pretty long.
I was,
Donna?
I was a little curious under goals. And it's, and like. Where the increase the number of community garden plots by 50%, where did that come from? Was that just a,
From the Natural Resources Conservation Committee.
okay,
So-
yeah, because I mean, we have so few.
Few.
I was just gonna say there,
Yeah.
you could double them and still not have all that many.
I think a lot of our residents use some of the Burlington system as well. I know I did for a long time. I was actually like a Burlington Community Garden member. And we just didn't have as many here.
Well, the one in Swift and Spear, I understand that UVM owns that.
Yep.
And manages it. It's in South Burlington and I don't know if it matters where you're from to use it.
It is in South Burlington. It is on land owned by UVM, but I believe Burlington manages it. Like you have to register.
At least they used to, because I was a member
I
of that.
think
when it
that's,
was-
I believe that's still true. I had a conversation with our recreation staff the other day about community gardens. I believe that's still true.
Yeah,
And-
we, something prepares it and
There's all sorts,
plowing and.
there's all sorts of things happening.
And we've seen the proposals for them in some of the new developments. I just wondered if the city has followed up to make sure that those actually get put in.
Yeah, so if it's on a site plan that's been approved, it has to be installed before they get their zoning permits for people to like move into homes and things. Or to actually, anyway, that's a whole development review process, but yes, anything that's on a site plan is checked by the city. For general, like large scale construction, it may not be checking the measurements of everything.
So regarding existing developments and particularly where there's condominium associations.
Yep.
I wondered if there's something the city can do to make it easier to incorporate community gardens. Condo boards tend to be difficult. And it would be really great if the city could, you know, in policy, say, you know, we'd like to see associations promote and dedicate and, you know, an area to community gardens. Because a lot of times you go to the condo associations, people tend to be a bit hard-handed in some of these organizations and say, that's not something that we're going to do just because we don't want it. And, you know, it would be nice from a policy standpoint, because there are people who would, you know, who don't have a lot of space themselves. And that they probably, but
I can say that is not something that the city would be able to require a
Not require.
homeowners association, but there's education options, there's other incentives, there's you know, sending a nicely worded letter that we as a city are encouraging these things, like, but there's not really anything with a lot of teeth. There's a lot of carrots and not a lot of sticks. So it depends how you feel about that.
yeah.
And I did mention private gardens. in
Yeah.
this.
Well, it sounds like, so Donna, what you're saying is you're in support of this goal here. You're just wondering how eventually it might get implemented.
Yeah.
So it sounds like no change.
Yeah, especially if you don't have a lot of land to increase the number, like, you know, encouraging places to, you know, use some existing land that could be incorporated. I don't know how you do that, but it's, I was gonna say 100% instead of 50. Cause I figured 50 is probably a good target for city-owned land. But I think there's a lot of other opportunities.
I feel like that would clarify this. That was the intention of this sentence. So I could add public community garden by 50% and then that's done. It is an option. There's a lot of community garden and public amenity, public open space amenity stuff in the LDRs. But this would be about city owned, city managed, city maintained, community garden plots. So I'm happy to do that.
So Michael and then Laurie.
I just wanted to say that both my homeowners association, Ridgewood and Indian Creek, have both had community gardens.
Yeah, those are nice ones.
And there put quite a lot of effort into them, but the residents over a very short period of time lost interest. Now, that is some years ago, and they lost interest in these places went into weeds and just, just basically discarded. The areas are still there, but nothing happens. I think maybe the general interest in community gardens and growing your own stuff has changed a lot in those 20 years that have transpired since they went into disuse. So it's not difficult if there's the interest, but it's difficult to keep people interested. One other thing, when we were looking at the airport rezoning report, I made a suggestion that one of the uses in that area could be community gardens. It's not owned by the city, but I'm pretty sure that given they can't do anything else with it and they want to be supporting the community, if the community wants community gardens over there, the Chamberlain community wants community gardens there, that would be a super place to do. There's plenty of space.
So let's try real hard to focus on things we want changed. So it sounds like we're in favor of what it says and we want to try to focus on things.
I think Donna wanted to change it to 100%.
Well, or increased number of public community garden plots, by
Yeah.
50%, which I think was good enough.
Okay.
Back to the first sentence that Michael was talking about, the world is facing a climate crisis with his words added. That whole paragraph is making statements, but it's not, there's no action to it. And I was hoping that it could say the world is facing a climate crisis and natural resource protection and conservation must be our, I would say primary, but we could just say focus as we work to minimize and mitigate the impacts of this crisis.
That seems
Because
good.
it gives it, it's not just saying these are things, it's giving it some priority and focus.
Although it's not really the primary because reducing fossil fuel use is really the primary.
So we can just say our focus.
Yeah, a focus.
A focus,
A
fine.
focus.
Okay, anything else in here?
I have a general question for Kelsey on goals and actions. Which are the policy statements, the goals or the actions?
Goals.
The goals.
Goals are the things where in 10 years, we can look back and say, we did this, we didn't do this, like this is what we were trying to reach. Actions are the little bits and pieces that get us to those goals.
Okay, if that's the case, the Affordable Housing Committee had in their notes or that various things they asked the city adopts policy changes and allocates resources. If those goals are policies, then I think we should have wording to that effect. That the city will adopt policy changes and allocate resources to do whatever it is we've got in the goal. Because I always want us to be unambiguous. It has to be clear, because somebody else, not in this room, is reading this, will not really know for sure that that is a policy recommendation.
So like in this section in particular, for the first, or even say the community garden one, you would want another action that says provide funding for community gardens? That kind of change? Is that like your general feedback?
Or do you mean like maybe at the beginning of the plan, describe goals in this plan
No,
mean?
I mean the bullet points at the beginning of each section, which is where people are gonna look. I'm gonna go back and find my,
So like this one, you would change both of these to also include the words, and the city will provide funding to do it. That,
yeah,
so like
Well-
every single goal in the whole thing is gonna specifically say,
I'm not sure that's gonna fly.
I guess I would say that I'm hearing our city manager in my head.
Yeah.
Saying that some of those funding and budgeting decisions are for current and future city councils as we move forward.
Michael,
Yeah.
what you're describing, you're looking for some teeth to some of these goals. in
yeah,
terms
for
of-
example, in moving just to the actions. We have create and implement a new open space plan, and in the next one, create, implement and fund management plans for city owned properties. I mean, if we don't implement and fund, then what's the point of, if that was a goal, for example, which I think it should be. We don't put that we're going to implement and fund it, why put it here?
I think implement would be fine. I think fund is an operations question. Because implementation may take a lot of different forms. It may take the form of tasking committee to look at it for another thing that doesn't
No.
require funding. Like there's a lot of sort of.
We could say implement and devote resources.
We do have an open space fund. I mean, so there is funding on an annual basis that's focused on environmental conservation and protection.
Yeah,
I mean, so I'm not certain, if you want my opinion, putting some kind of funding language in there or resources ties the hands necessarily of future counselors and budgets.
I guess
Well-
when I think about it, like, I feel like every single action we write there, we're saying by writing down the action, we think this is an important thing,
Yeah.
and it should be figured out
Mhm.
how to
How to
move
do
it
it.
forward. And in some cases, if that means funding, then it should be figured out, maybe a grant, maybe volunteer efforts, maybe city general fund, maybe opens in. I guess I'm just saying, Michael, it feels like to me, I wouldn't want to like go through these lists and be like, let's put the word funding in this action. But maybe we don't need funding in this
No.
action. I feel like it should apply to all of them. Like just generally, if it's an action, we're giving direction to put resources towards it.
I can,
in
and I
my
can put that
opinion.
clarification, as you mentioned, sort of in the introductory, sort of how to read this plan language,
well, yeah,
explaining.
I understand why
Yeah.
we need to leave out fund, because it ties the hands of the future council. But create and implement is, I think, necessary. Creating something without saying we're gonna implement.
I'm fine with adding an
And
implement.
I would
It's
put
just the next step.
those two items, create and implement an open space plan and create and implement management plans for all city owned properties into the goals.
Duncan?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I think for your point, Michael, I think anything, when we're done with this process, anything that's under goals or actions is a city priority,
The what?
is a city priority. I mean, we will have determined that it is a city priority.
That's why it's there.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we can't find everything, but we can certainly try to work towards everything on that list. But I think if after we're done with this whole process, if it's in goals or actions, it is a city priority.
I'm coming to this because we had a discussion about what a layperson reading the text, where they would find, how they would be able to discern what's a policy recommendation or policy plan and what's not. And that's where they are now. They're in the goals, not necessarily in the actions.
I'm wondering if,
Because I think the actions are descriptive, as you said, and the goals are prescriptive.
I'm wondering if in the goals, so they're sparse in this section. And I'm wondering if adding something more like if, I just off the top of my head, improve organization and management of the existing and potential future public open spaces under goals. And then 2 of the actions that make that happen are the new open space plan and management plans for city-owned properties
Just create and implement the management plan.
and implement.
Okay.
All right.
I'd like to see potentially an action added. There's the paragraph that talks about open lands and some sites in our currently built areas should be built while others need to be used as park spaces and vice versa.
Mhm.
We talked about this before. I'd like to see an action added that says, create a built, unbuilt suitability plan and map. So that specifically in our unbuilt areas, we're saying that some of those areas might be suitable for development. I would like to see mapped out which ones we're saying are suitable for development.
Mhm.
Because otherwise it's just saying, oh, well, maybe this one or maybe this one. And likewise, in our built environment, I would like to see us look at or have a map where we can say, yes, this ought to be saved as unbuilt. Which it is right now, and I think it would be really useful to have a map that shows us
So we have.
that inventory.
We
those
have,
spaces.
we have a rough version of built, unbuilt, based on a couple of different attributes, sort of size of lot, what kind of structures are on things like that. I think the flip side of what you're saying about like this area in a built area should remain unbuilt. May fall into the parks master plan sphere as sort of open space resources in a built area as the big definition of park space.
The flip side of that, the areas in the unbuilt environment where we
It
say
should be
should be built,
Mhm.
that needs.
Yep.
Whatever it falls into.
Yep.
We've got the map that shows the built area. I would like to see the areas within that unbuilt area that we think should, or in that built area, that we think should remain undeveloped.
I think.
Can I respond to Laura?
And the flip side is in our undeveloped areas, if we're saying there's some areas that are suitable for being built. I'd like us to identify them so that we're not just,
So I think that's a bit of the future land use map.
That's what
The
I-
areas that are yellow would be in the to possibly be built to some level. And the areas that are green are in the unbuilt and should remain almost exclusively unbuilt with the exception of single residential homes here and there. So I think that edges into that future land use map conversation. Is that what you were, it
Yeah,
sounds like that's what
in
you were
the
gonna
notes
say.
I sent you,
Mhm.
I made a note that these categories of unbuilt and unbuilt land should be shown and clearly identifiable in the future land use map.
yes,
And if we do that, I think we've
then you've done what
answered,
I'm talking about.
it answered
And
Laurie's.
then I guess another piece of what I think you're talking about is like making sure that that's like comprehensive, because we might be missing some areas. And I think that that's what this action, the create and implement new open space plan would do.
Would help
Like,
do.
is there a spot in the city where we don't have enough open space, then the plan would identify it, and then it could get kind of added to our future land use map eventually.
Yeah, the open space plan having a conservation bent and a parks master plan having like a human environment open space kind of
Would
sort
get
of flip
added to
sides of
green.
a similar process.
Works.
Right. Are we able to speed through the rest of the section?
Landscape and background, I had only one paragraph that thought should be changed, which is the third paragraph under landscape and background. It reads, currently, climate change poses significant challenges for all communities, both in how to mitigate it and to respond to it. The city has opportunities to address both. I've changed that to, I would like to see a change. The city must address both by implementing South Burlington's climate action plan. And then continue improving land use patterns, transportation modes, energy strategies to reduce the city's carbon footprint, not temper it.
So being specific.
Oh, yes.
It's in my note too.
There was a missing reference in under air quality.
That's
No mention of smoke and fires.
Right. Yeah, there it is. And
like-
smoke from forest wildfire.
Okay.
Pollutants.
reference to
Yeah,
smoke.
it's like, doesn't look like we have a lot of control over that.
No, we don't.
But it is definitely,
But
a-
it is.
it is a factor.
Okay, anything else in here?
I was hoping the climate and climate change section could get relocated above air quality.
Okay. Seems reasonable, climate change first.
And
I must have moved it because I've got it right up top.
you did it already.
Who was ahead of you there?
No, I did add smoke from forest wildfires, but as a pollutant.
Well, this is going well so far. What-
The last sentence in that climate and climate change section. I'm having a hard time understanding that sentence.
Yeah, the city will need to adapt via infrastructure updates, land use policy and regulation, public lands management and operations. Adapt. We'll have to, what, by that you mean, we'll have to implement adaptation measures?
Yep, I think so.
Well, maybe we should say that.
Is that what you're asking? It's a hard sentence to
Yeah.
understand.
Yeah.
It almost sounds like an incomplete
So
sentence. and
maybe the
it's
city
not.
will need to adopt adaptation measures. Land use policy regulation. Land management and operations. Well, but it doesn't say anything, yeah.
It just doesn't say anything.
What says,
The census doesn't have an object.
what says it needs to adapt, not adopt,
Yeah.
adapt.
Adapt to climate change.
But yeah, it's a tough. Yeah, it's not an easy
We'll leave it
sentence.
out.
Get shorter, just get rid of that.
What do you
sentence.
do, to climate change after adapt, isn't that what you're, we're,
No, I think
it's
we could leave it.
adapting to climate change.
Yeah, you could just add to climate change. That would give it the.
The city will need to adapt to climate change via.
Yes.
Because that's
That
what,
works.
that's what it's meant to.
Thank you.
Thinking.
I knew something was missing. This doesn't
See,
work.
if you think you can't read a packet in 3 days, try to write a packet in 3 days.
Yes.
I'll see you're doing super great, which I'm not sure we said recently enough.
Oh, and under
So-
geology, I think one that Jessica might appreciate is under the last sentence, site by site basis groundwater recharge areas into our bedrock aquifers. Are we allowing them to should be or will be? Will be considered when development is regulated or reviewed, because I don't know. Like what size project, it has to be before that's considered.
I think it's when there's a half acre of impervious surface
Okay.
is what our regulations say.
Okay, so
There's
should it
another-
be will be considered when applicable?
Yeah,
When
well,
applicable
it
development.
will be considered, I mean, it's always considered, but sometimes it's not required if there's.
How do we like the
falls
word
under the
is?
threshold. So, yeah,
We
good
have a
point.
note that refers to other lot sizes which calculated as lots
Well, it
less
should,
than 4 acres in size, plus lots over 4 acres in size with at least 10% impervious surface.
That's the note for what built means.
Yeah.
That's the
So
description.
maybe you
built.
could use something like.
should was the only word that I was questioning. I mean, should
Yeah,
that be will?
Yeah, I just say will or is.
I just changed should be to is.
Yeah. Is considered, okay.
Our regulations are actually quite good in that regard already. so it's good. Okay,
resource.
moving on.
Yeah, resource extraction now.
Well, I'd like to kind of be on housing by now, but we we can be on resource extraction. if we
Oh,
need to
we're
be.
not gonna go through all of them.
I was
Hoping to. move
I was
fast.
hoping to skip some, if,
All right, all I have to say is that old quarries, abandoned quarries are great opportunities for either recreation or wildlife habitats. And I've seen it in many other communities. Mainly swimming and fishing and sunbathing and aquatic life, bird life and so on. That's it.
seems good. Right, then we have
Working lands, nothing. for me.
Working lands, ecological resources.
I want to know in forestry what an ecologically oriented forestry is.
Like not clear cutting. It's selective cutting, cutting for management, cutting for sugar bush management, things like that. Sugar cutting, clearing for deer,
Not.
bedding
not doing
habitat.
that. Doing it or not doing it?
Not doing it, I think is what you're talking.
Where are we? The city supports ecologically oriented forestry operations,
Which are
Not clear
not.
cut.
not clear cutting.
But so
Yes,
it's-
selective cutting.
It's
Yes,
forest management or
Management.
silviculture.
silvicultural management for wildlife species, stuff like that.
Right. So ecological resources.
The wildlife paragraph, just wrote that there's a sentence in there about the mammals, you use the word target. I might use a different word.
It's
Just, I think
Where
that
is the wildlife paragraph about?
dictates we target relatively small mammal species. I might change that.
This is a different activity.
Yes,
Okay,
I don't think that was the intention.
good, good catch.
It's actually, that's actually from the Arrow report.
I would change the word target.
Yep.
Just saying.
Okay,
So which page are we
Just a
on
couple
right
of-
now?
Nomenclature points on agriculture. I mean, commercial and industrial scale agriculture, that paragraph.
Where are you, Michael?
Under agriculture,
Agriculture, right?
the second paragraph, the
Yep.
name, the South Village,
We're going backwards.
Yep, Hubbard
Yeah.
Park, Wheeler Homestead.
South
It's-
Village
it's not-
Hubbard Natural Recreation Area, it's not a park, and Wheeler Homestead Area, it's not a park.
Yeah, you don't put Wheeler Nature Park in that because it's the Wheeler Homestead specifically.
So that same thing, the same in the next paragraph, and that's all I had to say there.
Yeah, because there's, just so people understand, there's no agriculture in the nature park, period.
Good
Mm-hmm.
And then I had a question on the soils. if it- nobody-
Before you get to soils, the last paragraph of agriculture.
Yeah,
It talks about continue to support and enable community scale farms. I'd like to see the city planning process focus on protecting our undeveloped lands that have agricultural potential.
Yeah, that's what
Well,
Act,
if that-
that's what Act 250 was supposed to do, but apparently Act 250 doesn't do that
I just thought
anymore.
maybe we could put it in here.
Right,
are you talking about the last sentence?
The last paragraph,
Yeah.
I'd just like to add a last sentence that says the city planning process will focus on protecting our undeveloped lands that have agricultural potential
yeah.
I
Yeah,
had
as a clear statement.
We went back and forth on that when we did Article 12,
Okay,
and we did not put in there explicit protection of agricultural lands regulatory. We decided other methods might be best.
Does it really matter though? What
I
we
mean,
do,
well, if you put,
it doesn't matter if we put it in here saying that we're gonna focus on
then
protecting agricultural lands. Then that's going against a decision that may have been made already, but
Yeah, so and there was some, like, part of
This is
the
what I'm learning.
discussion was the mapping. We actually did a bunch of like looking at where those soils are and they're not necessarily in any of the spots that have been farmed. They're in like weird spots where you wouldn't necessarily want to farm, was part of that discussion at the time. And then with the Act 250 having some oversight over it, you know, we just decided at the city level, it felt
okay,
maybe not the best, you know, and some of it was already in like the NRP, which has kind of separate it wasn't based on the soil specifically, but it had. So I mean, there was discussion about it, and I know at least at that point, it
But,
wasn't followed through with.
as a matter of principle, we shouldn't be writing this plan to fit our land development regulations that we passed.
Yeah, I know, I'm
This
not
is-
saying.
This is
we
what we
should.
want to do in the future. So,
I brought that up because it strikes me that South Burlington has very few agricultural lands left. And maybe that's not where I would choose to put a farm. But if a small market garden farmer could have a market garden there, it's gonna be a much higher value to us 10 years from now than a house being put on it. So I just,
Right.
I don't think you can say that because
Yeah. I don't think
small
it's-
market gardeners tend to come and go really quickly because they find out quickly that there's no money to be made in it. And they go out of business fairly quickly.
they are
So
doing better
in
and
10
better in
years-
the last 10 years.
Oh, I am partnered with one and he's not doing better and better in
That's-
the
that's-
last 10
that's just
years.
one.
But anyway,
I had a much
I don't
trickier
s-
question.
I don't
when
see how
she
there's a
said-
problem with the way it is, you know,
Okay.
because it already
Yeah.
shows the intent is to,
Okay.
you know, keep it unbuilt. You know, in prime agriculturals.
I had two things. In that last sentence, I changed the word minimized to prevent. Could be used to
Where are-
prevent development.
Where are you?
Where are you?
Same paragraph about soils,
No,
We're
we
in
were-
soils.
we weren't on that part.
Last line.
last line. Could be used to prevent development on unbuilt primary soils for uses other than agriculture, rather than minimize. And then I had a question.
I'm okay with minimize though.
It's in the very last sentence before ecological resources header.
So my question for everybody was, what does affordable housing and economic development have to do with agriculture? Why is it in here?
Because you can't put two things on the same piece of land.
What?
What? The city must
Balance small and
balance.
mid-sized agricultural opportunities with demands for affordable housing and economic development.
I think we could just get rid of that sentence, though. It is true. We don't need to be qualifying right there, right?
Okay.
So that we're gonna delete that city must, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, we can just,
So
we
strike
can
out.
just talk about the soils of this paragraph.
Okay, there is a question. Under community gardens, the last line. I think a little bit of editing might make it a little more equitable. To say additional public community gardens would help meet the needs of our diverse community. Who have a desire to garden, but may not have access to private garden space, which is what we were saying before. I don't think this is unique to New Americans. I think it's kind of, it applies to everybody who wants a garden and doesn't have room for it. So why are we only saying this for New Americans?
I don't know.
That doesn't make any sense to me.
It was probably equity.
Yeah,
Yes,
but it's
but-
equity for everybody, you know, it's like,
No, I'm
why
not-
do you want equity
just
for New
that-
Americans and not
I think
for
the
everybody
sentence
else?
That's what I think the sentence said.
Yeah.
If you want to switch it on.
I would say it should be equitable for everybody.
And the only thing I was gonna say under community gardens is Queen City Park, the fire district has made some of its community land, community garden. And I was looking at the map, JC Park could easily have a community garden put into part of it. And there are other places around the city where that. could-
Baycrest,
Is that?
Baycrest Park.
So there is a land question and a maintenance question and a human resources question. It's kind of,
Yeah,
there are spaces in our parks all over the place, but there is.
Still there.
yeah, okay.
It's like 9 something.
Yep.
We have the goal.
Yeah,
We don't
doing
wanna be
it.
that specific.
Okay, ecological resources. Anything in here?
Just under the street trees. I'd like to see something that says protect urban ash tree populations with vaccinations versus removal wherever practical.
I would say that goes to implementation.
Anything else on this?
I'd like to see the city will minimize tree removal, removed from development sites. That's the last line. The last sentence in the first full paragraph that starts forests and street trees. Just another one of those wills instead of should.
I think I spent a long time on that last time, so I have nothing.
Are
That's
we
it.
ready to move on to surface and groundwater resources?
I'm ready to move to housing if you want.
I would love if we could move to housing.
Oh,
Unless, Donna, do you have something else on this one?
it's probably not necessary to say it. Under the paragraph that's just before wildlife. I'm gonna say the city will also incentivize expansion of natural buffers in backyards and reduction in total lawn area to further buffer natural resources like wetlands. And I was gonna say, comma, and reduce the negative effects of high summer temperatures. Because I don't think we say that anywhere. That, you know, it's like all these people that insist on lawns. And then they put in air conditioners when they could have just planted trees and put in a lot fewer air conditioners. You know, so I'd like to add that.
Yeah, I mean,
Very reasonable.
people have shown that there's a 10-degree drop from walking in the sun and walking under.
I mean, just a yard with trees compared with a yard without trees is. It's just like, I don't know how people can live without trees in their yards, big trees.
Baking. Okay, anything else before housing?
Surface and groundwater.
Okay.
Quick question on watersheds.
Mhm.
The third end of the third line under watersheds, it says most of these watersheds are stormwater impaired. Aren't in fact all of them impaired?
They are not all impaired.
The waterways,
Watersheds.
the watersheds in
Not,
South Burlington,
yeah,
not all impaired.
it's not all. Right? And
There's more discussion in the stormwater chapter, but it is not all of them.
Okay.
it's a lot of them.
Hmm,
I think it's 5 of the 7. I'm not remembering. Maybe Englesby is not. Anyway,
Anglesby certainly is once it gets to Burlington.
Okay.
Are we still under wildlife?
We are not,
We moved on from that.
we're in the water part.
Can I just mention at the very last line under the wildlife paragraph? That sentence is just crazy. It's just a little too bureaucratic. I was just thinking if we could just change that to, rather than how to balance wildlife habitat conservation needs, to say, we must learn to better balance wildlife habitat conservation needs with human habitat needs.
And could we change balance to protect,
Learn to coexist.
how to protect wildlife habitat conservation?
Well, here it's saying balancing. with
the
human
point of that
habitat.
sentence is that the rest of this section talks a lot about needing to conserve and will conserve, but this is bringing back that there are other vision statements in the plan.
Just vision statements don't
Yeah.
don't really mean anything to most people.
So anything else in the water section?
Water section. Watersheds. City must.
Paul's trying to get back in, Kelsey. Looks like he fell off.
No, he was out. Okay.
Okay, so we are on the surface and groundwater resources section. In case anyone lost track. Okay, so any additional comments or either from commissioners or from the public on this section, which is the natural resource protection and conservation section? So we're gonna move on to housing.
I'm sorry if I missed it. Was there anything about invasive species in there?
Yes, there was.
Yeah.
They had something about removing invasive species. if I remember seeing this.
Yes, it is on page 11. It's at the top of page 11.
Yes, very good, thank you. Megan.
Control F is.
Don't have that on mine, so
Remove
anything,
Non-native invasive species.
okay, any other comments or questions?
I have a
Water
question about
quality?
the
Loretta?
community gardens. And I don't know how many community gardens we have now, but if you have a goal of increasing your community gardens by 50%, if you have one community garden, then you increase it by 50% and you get another half of that community garden. So I'm wondering if, you know, you might use another measurement.
Yeah, and you know, I think we got that number from one of the committees, so we were using that number. But it's a really good point, like if maybe maybe we should think about like a per population number like we use for some of the other goals, so.
So somebody made a tongue-in-cheek comment to me that there's a zero missing after the 50.
500.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a good point. Maybe we can see if there's like a different metric. Megan?
Yeah, and I have a few things for community gardens. I was curious, we have in our charter, provisions to empower neighborhoods to form neighborhood forums. And so I'm curious if we could empower them further to apply to the city to develop a plan for managing and cleaning and tending to the community garden plots. And that would be an incentive to neighborhoods to take over that responsibility and ownership, but it would also be a community builder, and it would be a real neighborhood identity builder. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
It's a really good point, Megan. You know, we've had a lot of discussion about this thing and we have the goal, but we don't necessarily have an action addressing it. I feel like we probably need to add an action around community gardens to like figure out
Where and how.
where and how to do it. And maybe there's some policies that we can put in place, or maybe there's incentives, or maybe there's.
That's kind of what you were talking
Yeah.
about.
And which part of the city owns it?
Yeah,
You know, like
so,
who actually does this? Is this, you know, a public works thing, or is this a recreation and parks thing, or?
yeah,
who-
so I think we have some
where does this
ideas, but I
live?
think having the action of figuring it out, however that's worded.
Well,
Um,
right now,
like-
the work of maintaining these is split between the city and the people who are lucky enough to have a plot. They do the maintenance once the city is privileged, the planting, the weeding, the watering. And at the end of the season, then the city comes in again and cleans up. So it's it's already a shared responsibility. But I think it's where can we do it and how can we generate the
So
interest to get it?
This is part of why I used it as the example of things that might move around in sections, because there's absolutely environmental reasons to put it in this section, but I was also toying with putting it in the sort of recreation and open space section for,
I think this
because
is
it
the right
fits sort
place.
of, it fits sort of in both, but my point being because the determination of where additional community gardens may go could be part of the parks master planning process, which falls under the recreation side. So it's all overlapping things. It's a whole web of stuff.
Sounds like no one's disputing it being here for now.
Okay.
So maybe for now, keep it here.
So the equipment, you know, like Parks and Rec, I don't think has a rototiller. But Public Works may actually be able to have one and house one and maintain a rototiller. So it depends on, you know, your structure of who's got the equipment and stuff.
Public Works does have it.
Public Works is amazing. They've got like all kinds of stuff.
There's generally a lot of people in the community that you just front porch forum, okay, who does rototilling? You know, unfortunately, a lot of the people won't come back into my neighborhood because they realize that there's grapefruit-sized rocks right under the surface. And they don't want to do that there. So you do have to define where the soil is appropriate.
Okay, did we have another?
Water quality? Oh,
Oh, you have more comments?
I still have comments. I wrote all this up.
Yeah, go ahead.
I read this till like 11:30
I know,
last
all right.
night.
Go right ahead.
So I'm like, okay, here's my
We're
comment.
doing both.
Underwater quality. So that's the next to last page, just before quality of life. we missed a few of the, non-potent sources for sure, including, chemical, gasoline and oil contamination are not mentioned. And those are huge. Those are really big problematic areas. Then also.
Those would be point sources. Like an old gas station or something?
Yeah,
that would
those
be
are
a
point, those are
source.
point sources, right?
Even asphalt.
Mhm.
Yeah. Well, the residues.
Which would be
And then-
stormwater runoff.
Then it talks about the city does restrict the use of fertilizers and pesticides on city properties. And I wanted to add, and may consider doing so throughout the city.
We cannot do it. It's a state regulated
Oh.
item. The city does not have the power to regulate pesticides.
Okay, good to know.
Oh.
Good to
that's a
know that.
bummer.
Mhm.
Or herbicides?
Nothing,
talked
none
about
of those
that
things. It
before.
is, the city only has the powers that are granted to it by the state, and that is not one of them. It's been made very clear.
Might we beg the state to let us do it?
You can try. Call Phil, see what he says.
Make that call.
I'm already in a huge fight with UVM about glyphosate. They've been using it on the fields around where I live for 25 years. The ground must be saturated with this stuff.
It goes away. though.
Okay, any,
Long
so
off
They
we
say it
can,
goes-
Megan?
Yeah. Let me get back to my notes here. The other, just two things. You have on top of page 11, incorporate pollinator species into landscaping. And something that I think we could bring into our land development regulations, so I tucked that away into your thinking caps, is for future, LDR amendments, percentage of the, unbuilt upon land could be set aside for a pollinator garden, for instance. I just wanted to kind of put that into your thinking. I love that you do name Nomo May, Race of Blade. I think you could name pollinator gardens if you are so inclined.
Well, we also named the local national parks, which is.
Oh.
So
Oh.
that's in there.
Oh, there you taught me something. All right, excellent. And then I just wanted to, as a former architect wannabe, architecture is a cultural asset. And I do support Donna's language there. It's aesthetic. And it brings a sense of place and pride. And just sitting in this room, you feel good, don't you? Right? And so there's just so much that architecture brings. I just wanted to.
Provided the builder uses an architect.
Yes.
Provided that.
Yeah.
A good designer.
It's topical, but I bought some honey in the last few days that's made by a company that gets its honey from pollinators in ground-based solar facilities.
Yep.
And encourage them to plant pollinators under these things, because they can't use it for anything else anyway.
Donna?
So under light pollution, I made some professional updates to this, and I can give you the copy here. But the change is South Burlington has taken regulatory steps to reduce light pollution by requiring roadway, sign, and high output building lighting to be full cutoff type lighting, or lighting to be full cutoff type. And then generally light pollution reduction is a policy goal, blah, 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 blah. Other guidance exists in guidelines like the IESNA model lighting ordinance that the city can look to for guidance to move forward. South Burlington will update its lighting ordinances to incorporate the latest technology.
I love your sheet. You can give it to me afterwards. That's fine, Donna.
What was that kind of lighting?
Well,
Cut.
the downcast and shielded
Cut off
like
lighting.
not language that really means anything. Where full cutoff lighting is no longer the latest technical term, but it is a technical term that means something.
So I
And
just
you have to define the kind of lighting that applies to, because you can't use it generally, because it would take away most of your building mounted light options. You know, and it also, it's the high output lighting that you're really concerned about, not low voltage. So the current language is like ridiculous.
So
It
it's
makes no sense.
Full cutoff lighting,
Full cutoff.
and that means,
Full cutoff means that 100% of the light goes below the horizontal plane. Downward.
Shining light.
It doesn't mean it's good, it just means it's not going up.
okay,
But
that was my question.
whereas
So I didn't know.
the guidelines, the new guidelines that I referenced there, that is the best standard around, and it gives you options to create zones within a governmental district. And say, because for a city center area, you don't necessarily want the same guidelines as you have for like Lake Shore District. They're different, they have different requirements. And so it's a little more sophisticated. It's not really all that complicated, but it says exactly what you can and can't do and lets you create those zones, which is why it's good.
Are we
One,
ready to move down housing?
almost.
Thought you said
There's
we
a
were
sentence,
done.
there's generally light pollution reduction is a policy goal of South Burlington. If it's a policy goal, it should go up in the goals, be listed.
Yeah,
And
got
I'm
it.
delighted to see you use the word policy goal, which is what I advocated for last time.
You wanted policy objective.
Well, policy goal is good enough.
Well, and the action,
Felt less wonky.
the action would be to, create a modern, updated lighting ordinance.
Yeah.
That would be an action.
I'm sorry,
Okay,
I
that's
lied,
fine.
I had one more. I'm done.
Megan has something else too.
Yeah, so on page 11, you do talk about with regard to ecological resources, having the vegetation, trees, shrubs, etc., be used for noise reduction. I do believe it's a quality of life issue. And there's a New York Times article talking about the health effect of noise. And I know that's a whole new section. And I can, do my advocacy work on July 17th, when whoever's there is gonna present it and lead that discussion, but I think noise should be included.
Add it, please.
Mhm.
You have
that's a good idea.
I totally
right in
agree.
your backyard,
Yeah, you're the highway.
Megan, wraps up, remember?
sorry?
Jessica,
Yes, yes.
I wanted to piggyback on that under environmental justice. I think we should also include noise pollution.
Yeah.
And I'm not just referring to the airport, but there are houses along the interstate where the noise from the interstate really affects their quality of life.
Yep.
And those houses also tend to be more affordable.
And rental.
Yeah, I think I completely agree, and I'm wondering if this is the only location in the plan where that should go, or if it applies across like other parts of the city, or. Cause this quality of life section is kind of us, like in the natural resources section.
Mhm.
So I wanna make sure we're addressing it in all the spots that make.
Okay,
sense.
well,
Like,
I think you
if
should
it
adjust.
only it feels like it should go here, but maybe there's another spot also like in housing where it gets talked
It's
about
kind of like
also.
noise, it's like light pollution.
Yeah.
I think it goes right next to the light pollution
Can we
section.
mention some type about
Perfect.
quality of life? I've got some
Yeah,
ideas.
thank you. Is that enough feedback for you to add a section on that, Kelsey?
I would like to, add to the noise pollution issue is that the volume of studies now that show the detrimental effects of noise pollution. And, the letters that our local doctors have sent and stuff like that. I mean, it's getting to the point where it's inescapable harm, and we don't want to be in the position of cities that have denied this and then, down the road find that we're in much worse of a position than if we acknowledged it.
Right. Okay, we're housing.
Housing.
Okay, on to housing.
Just a note, Kelsey, in the stuff I sent you, wherever I saw something that a word missing or misspelled or something, that's just for you. I'm not gonna,
Thank
I'm
you.
not gonna
Yeah.
even.
And that goes to everyone. If anyone sees like a word missing or something misspelled or like a sentence that like grammatically doesn't make sense, like, you know, those can go directly to Kelsey, like, you know, if you, Don, I know you have some notes there, that maybe we didn't cover all those things, you know, we could. I think that makes sense to go kind of directly to staff. We don't need.
Anything pure typo that doesn't change meaning is fine. You know, just go straight to me.
Okay, housing.
Yes. One right up front.
Oh, right ahead.
I'm not in favor of using the word crisis in this case. The climate is a crisis, but housing is a shortage, not only in South Burlington and in the region and in the state and in the country, but it's global. And it's a shortage which can be solved, not a crisis which needs the kind of global action that like the climate crisis is. So I'd rather use the word, I'd rather like to see us use the word that it's an acute housing shortage.
There was direct feedback from the.
I was gonna say,
It's
that's
the affordable
the
housing.
Affordable Housing Committee
Hammered
directly asked that
crisis.
crisis be
I
used.
saw the note after I put this in, because I read it later on, because it's further down.
Yeah.
Okay, well,
I just want, you know,
We're-
what do
we-
people think about
we
it?
heard from a person on this, but we also heard from the committee kind of saying opposite. Any other thoughts up here?
I mean, I agree with you, Michael, it's not the significance of climate crisis, but I believe it is a crisis. It is a crisis. We have a desperate shortage.
For the
and
people who
Yes,
don't have it.
it is a desperate shortage, but it's a shortage. It's not, it's a soluble problem.
But for the people who are living it now, it is a crisis.
Mm-hmm.
If I don't have a house, I'm freaking out. And it gets right down to the basics of food, water, and shelter.
Yeah.
So for me, it's not a crisis. But it is for a lot of people.
I agree.
And I think that's,
We've got lots of housing.
you know, we
But
got
it's
two
just
thousand
not the
people
right
coming
kind
out
of
of.
housing.
I don't know that there's a lot of empty housing. I guess I'm hearing multiple commissioners speak in favor of leaving the language
Then
as well as support from
if that's the
committee.
majority, then let's leave it.
Right, if we continue to hear feedback, the opposite. we can- Okay, anything else up here? We're gonna focus on commissioner discussion first.
That's another word I'd like to change, in the last paragraph on this first section. It talks about, in support of community to growing our local business and economy. And I'd like to change growing to sustaining.
Lori, you and I are gonna come to blows on this
I
one.
know we are.
Which
Well,
one?
First time either.
Since
We
we-
had some discussion
Since
the
we
last
talked
time.
about crisis, I just thought I'd bring up growing,
Discussion.
because
I'm
sustain,
not gonna go along with you on that, but
Where
is that?
The last paragraph before.
the
goals.
first sentence of the last paragraph,
Okay.
to sustaining our local business and economy.
I would not be in favor of changing that, but we can agree to disagree on that.
And as you would probably guess, that is language that is from the Economic Development Committee. As the name of their
Yeah,
committee name.
Well, I think the fact that it has the word local
Yep.
in there makes me feel much better about the word growing. It's not
Okay.
just vast unchecked growing, it's really about our local. Businesses. Does that
I have
Make
no
it a
prob-
little,
I have no problem being over.
other stuff?
The third paragraph. Where we, in the second line, we say, and to meeting our climate change mitigation goals, it should be our climate action plan goals. And the last sentence, we acknowledge that increasing housing while avoiding isolated construction in currently unbuilt areas will require increasing allowed heights, allowed densities, and other dimensional standards. Because without doing those things, we will never get the affordability and density that we need.
I think you're right, this sentence reads weird the way.
Yeah.
it is.
While should be will.
Just change while
Well,
to
to
will
will.
and change climate, change mitigation to climate action plan.
And the Goals or actions here.
I should also say that I've asked the Affordable Housing Committee for some statistics. They were going to provide me with some additional numbers to be included in this, that they would like to see included in this section that would then be vetted through staff and then through you guys for inclusion or not inclusion. They just didn't get it to me in time to go into this draft.
Okay. Affordability. Next page.
Definitionally affordable, why don't we just say of defined affordable
A
housing?
definition.
Yeah, or something about that. Definitionally is like a really weird word.
Okay, nobody needs
Affordable by
definition.
definition.
I put in, that's what, that's
Yeah.
in my note to you,
Yeah.
Betsy.
Okay, we on to page 3, that's in your affordable housing page.
Yeah, I wondered if there's a specific, if we can add a specific target for affordable housing appropriate to families with children. Because it seems like that's, you know, we haven't broken it down that way, and yeah, you can create affordable apartments and even affordable, you know, efficiencies and stuff like that. But I mean, I guess I've heard people discussing some friction in the new apartment buildings with kids who are unsupervised, hanging around the buildings, and, you know, people inside aren't always comfortable with those unsupervised kids.
So I think there's a lot of issues layered in what you've said. There is, in our affordability requirements, there are requirements for the affordable units to be of the same, I believe it's the same number of bedrooms on average as the market rate units. So you couldn't have a bunch of 3-bedroom market rate units and then a bunch of studios that are affordable. So there is some of that that's baked into the LDRs already.
Well, I guess that wasn't, my point was that perhaps apartment building isn't the most appropriate types of housing for families with particularly teenagers, and
I guess I would disagree with that, but that's just me.
it's, I guess it's just has to do with supervision. You know, that, and then that's each family, you know,
That's
it's a
kind of
family.
outside of our control.
kind of-
You're getting into.
I was gonna say,
And
I grew
attention to
up
her
I grew up in a very rural area with a lot of unsupervised teenagers.
It's true.
Oh.
That's true. Just-
But nobody saw you.
Okay.
Yeah, it's sort of a
any,
matter of, you know, how visible are you?
Anything on the smart growth page? Page 4. Okay, the short-term rental page.
Oh, there was something here that it was unclear. This was under existing housing stock. And I wasn't sure what they were trying to say. It's the paragraph that says these include homes in neighborhoods like Chamberlain, Mayfair, Park and Orchards. Homes from this era have challenges with insulation, energy efficiency, and building materials.
They're old.
What exactly is the problem with building materials?
They're built with 2x4s
They're old.
and possibly lead paint, also asbestos.
For
Also,
insulation.
For insulation, well, that's called out specifically. There's a lot of things when many thousands of homes were built in the post-war period very quickly. And that
So
results
it
in-
wasn't really exterior finishes, because I thought it was getting
No.
exterior finishes.
As a builder, I'll
but they
say a
weren't
lot of
open.
those homes have really good bones. 2x4s are small.
Mhm.
There are ways to insulate the buildings.
Mhm.
I mean, there are a lot of those homes that I've renovated and worked on. And they
Yep.
are a lot better than the homes that were built in the 80s.
Well,
I mean, way better.
Yep.
So,
Well, that's kind of what I was getting at with the exterior finishes, because if the exterior finishes
wasn't
are
finishes.
poor, you know, I mean, we can deal with that.
yeah,
You know,
But the
that's,
envelope has to be tight.
the envelope can be improved.
if the bones are strong, the envelope can be tight.
Yeah.
So is
but it is
there
expensive.
a,
Right, it's expensive.
is there a suggested change that you're thinking?
Well, I just didn't know what was meant by it. It was
Does
just
it-
unclear.
Right, then anything else?
Bottom of page 4.
And then-
Says the city should consider application of residential building codes to the construction of single family homes as well. I think it should say and implement an inspection and CO system. Is,
That would be implied with supplying the residential building code, but it can be
Well-
said expressly.
we got building codes and they're just not, there's no inspection, so there's no enforcement.
The residential building code does not apply to single family homes currently.
The state one does.
Well, no, the state one does, but we don't,
But there's no
we don't
enforcement.
enforce the state with the residential one here. But it does apply, it just isn't enforced anywhere.
Burlington has adopted the residential building code for single family homes. South Burlington has not.
Yes.
But the state has an overriding residential energy code.
Not for single, not energy code,
Is,
building,
oh, building code.
Building
code.
Yes.
Building. code.
building.
So you're saying it's implied that if we're gonna have building codes, we'll have inspectors?
Yes.
Okay.
Isn't the RBES, the residential building energy
Energy code.
code,
Residential
state one?
building energy standard, yeah.
it's a state standard.
The
Not for
state,
single family homes.
it is,
This is.
It is
this
for energy, but not for
only
building.
for energy, not for building.
This
For
isn't
energy,
about
right?
the energy code. This is.
Not about
this is a
the
About
different thing.
construction codes.
Yes.
Okay.
Onward.
Anything from the public on housing? Megan, you wanna go ahead first?
Yeah, I just want to say, as someone who lives in a, I don't know, I've heard 1959 to 1962, I have to look at my land records, but our house is tight. We've had it checked out by, anyway, the companies that do that testing, and it's a very well constructed house. Yes, the first floor that was the original structure was painted with lead paint. But you just are careful. I
Deal with
mean,
it.
it's certainly, we've lived very well in there for 21 years. And so I just wanted to say that it's not.
Nothing in
all
this, nothing in this language was intended to call out anyone's
Yeah.
particular home. There are homes that were built in that era that have particular challenges.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, it is language that kind of says this is housing right for,
No, that's,
no, okay.
no.
As someone who lives in that house, I kind of feel that way. But what I would say is that, there is a need for the children and teens to have places to play and congregate. So just to get to the concern, about, where children can play, I would just really encourage that be something that we put in there clearly. I don't have any recommendations, just.
I do, but it's not for tonight. It's something that I'll write to all of you about
Yeah,
co-housing.
and I am not just speaking as one counselor, I have members of the public who have asked for this, and I've told them I am advocating for it. And so I am here with several people sitting behind me.
So I guess, to that point, we have a whole section on like park related items, but we do have some overlap in some of our other sections. Like, does it make sense to like specifically make that statement in the housing section that we need to make sure that there's parks and congregating areas close to all of our housing? I think it's maybe one where we want to really cross-reference that, because it has come up. I've gotten emails as well. I think it's a hot topic.
Affordable housing.
The only thing that you need to be careful of congregating areas, you need to define that a little bit better.
Yeah,
That's a little,
but to, pick up a game of soccer,
yeah.
that
Yeah.
kind of place, right?
So maybe play.
And does the width within a quarter mile of everybody's residence?
Isn't that-
Bill, or is
I would
that
love
too
that.
far? Well, that's in the plan.
Yeah.
Maybe it's not soccer, maybe it's basketball then.
But I would say that especially for
You can do that. in a
congregate
garden.
housing, which I think is multifamily housing,
It's a little bit of a different definition.
Multifamily housing. I think it
needs to
be
have it,
closer.
it needs to be
Yes.
there. There needs to be a courtyard. You know, where the.
It ought to be a requirement of multifamily development.
There is a requirement in multifamily development for site amenities and civic spaces, depending on the size. The developers currently have choices of what that looks like. So there's probably 20 options of different things that they can do that meet the requirements for civic space and or site amenity. And they may need one or the other or both, depending on their.
Is there a way to give play area
Probably, but that's a implementation, that's a regulatory thing down the road.
Right.
Yeah, but I think this kind of a statement in this section makes a lot of sense. Okay, anything else in housing before we go? We haven't heard from you. Bethany.
Poor Kelsey, she got something from me. I'm Betty Malencia from the Common Areas for Dogs Committee, and I just wanted to say, like Megan, or in other meetings, about having green space adjacent to these multifamily or these whatever you want to call them, high density housing, because you have people who can't walk a quarter of a mile to get to an open space or whatever. You need something adjacent to. When you have 100 apartments, there needs to be some kind of green space. And I'd say green space, not just concrete with benches. I want to think about it that way. And also, many people will have dogs. People don't want to hear about it, but the reality is you have about 40% of homes have dogs. So when you're building these big congregate, these big high density apartment buildings, you can, for every 100 apartments, you can get upwards of 40 dogs for 100 apartments. Where are they going? So you want some kind of small green space. I'm not saying you need a dog park, but there should be some kind of space where you have a dog relief area so that they're not using the schoolyard and they're not using the little pretty park that's across the street in Market Street. You want these big apartment complexes need to have amenities so that people can take care of their animals' hygiene.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And I don't know if that needs to be a separate kind of goal or if it can be like kind of with, yeah.
I have Betty's feedback.
She's got all my notes.
Okay,
Thank you, Kelsey.
did you have something too?
Yeah, just the comments about the language earlier. The housing crisis is a crisis by most definitions, but crisis is also a vague word. I like where Michael was going with this, in talking about the housing shortage. And so using language more like an unprecedented housing shortage and affordability problem is really direct and specific. And it has emphasis like the word crisis, but provides more specificity. So that's just a thought for folks.
Like that. Could you repeat that again?
Unprecedented housing shortage and affordability problem.
I like that.
Um,
You like that, Michael?
Yep.
I'm okay with that. And, because I think you're right. I think it kind of gets at crisis, but it's more specific. Any, Loretta?
I want to wade into the growing versus sustaining discussion. And sustaining is, somewhat vague, but, relatively understandable. Growing, I have no idea what that would look like. Is growing, all buildings, is growing a whole lot of roads, is growing. Go ahead.
Can I offer a suggestion as a single person company? I would have loved to have grown to the point where I could hire somebody and I couldn't. There were a whole bunch of reasons here and very specific to this region. that I wasn't able to grow beyond a single person company. So that kind of growth I really appreciate, you know, it's like, do I have enough business to support another person? That's the kind of growth, you know,
Well. wouldn't
most
that
of
be
us
great
are
to,
dealing with here, you know,
just To be kind of specific.
or have a little bit more space to expand your business into, you know?
Yeah.
I was the one that brought that up, and it does talk about growing local business. So it does bring it back to local as opposed to just.
Big mega
There's,
stores.
yeah, there's so many things here that make it difficult for small businesses to exist. And I just, you know, I think it would be great if we acknowledge that more, you know, and just like, I could have been probably a lot more successful in a bigger place. What I stayed,
I wonder if there's a different way of expressing it.
I think growth is good.
Yeah, and growing our tax base.
And it's not, I think, you know, big businesses, you get takeovers and stuff like that. And I can tell you, just having been in Pittsburgh, that you experience negative growth when you have big businesses that get eaten by other businesses.
That's right.
That is not what you want.
That's
That's
right.
not,
Yeah.
anyway.
Megan?
Yeah, and growth too has to do with the tax base. It's a way to keep our property taxes lower is by having more commercial activity and more commercial, it's getting that to be that hour when I lose my words, you make more money, profits, higher profits, right? And that's how we tax businesses, it's based on their profits. And we're taxed based on our value of our land plus our bedrooms and our square footage and all those things. So growing.
Sitting in a tip district.
Yeah, so I am all for your lower taxes and for the growth of our commercial tax base. Just want to put it that way.
Well, so you've got the word local in there, which is reassuring to me. But as you can, you know, you can imagine just growing by itself could mean a lot of different things, which we're not excited about.
You can tell we're not in
Okay,
Florida.
we're gonna get ready to move on to transportation here. Eddie?
I've thought of this numerous times, when you drive by a lot of vacant retail space or commercial space. Is there any way to look at a developer who has lots of vacant space, who's continuing to build new places in other spots, and somehow it seems like, is there some way, or maybe you can't by, for whatever legal reasons, but when somebody has 50,000 square feet of vacant space and they're gonna put in another 30,000 square foot place in some other spot, is there a way for the city to kind of have a minimum or whatever amount of commercial space that can remain vacant versus, you know, just having no way to limit how much vacant commercial space is out there? Do you know what I'm saying? Because we'll use a small example is I live in a
I
condominium.
think we hear what you're saying.
You know what I'm saying?
Yes, I'm not the city attorney, but no.
Yeah. You couldn't say to someone, you've got all this space.
And we're
Okay.
talking about housing,
Okay.
and we're now gonna talk about transportation,
I was
so.
putting under the short-term rentals.
Okay.
I just wanna know, what is our definition of short-term rental?
So that is something that the city council is working on an ordinance for right now, so that language will be updated. If/when that all is solidified, because that will be likely before this plan has to be adopted. So that
Okay.
language will be circled back into and reflected. Generally speaking, you have to be, my understanding, and Megan can correct me or Helen can correct me, is that there has to be a person who is the legal resident of the property. So effectively 6 months and a day, you have to live there to be able to rent it other parts of the year.
Except for ADUs.
Except for ADUs.
No. Is there a way for me to just come back to the older housing stock through an email to you all? Will you reconsider this? Cause I'd really like to think about it and include weatherization or something, because a lot of us have weatherized. And so just to, again, getting to the goal, like our goal is not to have urban redevelopment, but let's, just keep going with weatherization.
Yes.
Okay.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah, and there will be, as we sort of said at the very beginning of the meeting, the intent is that through July and August, the draft will be static. So that will be an opportunity for any and all further additions to be made. This is not your last shot at anything.
Thank you.
Okay, transportation.
The two pedestrians in the first sentence, I think one of them could go.
Okay, we don't need two pedestrians.
What?
What?
I hear that Lori hates pedestrians.
That's
what I'm
right.
hearing.
Okay, well,
Growth of pedestrians, Lori.
Getting out of control.
so, and we don't necessarily need to go page by page.
So, yeah, one that Bike and Ped Committee has talked about this in reaction to complaints about the lack of parking in certain places, particularly Veterans Park. And so we had a very nice and long discussion about controlling access to free parking to reduce excessive local use of personal vehicles. And then beyond that, incentivizing people to carpool or use alternative transportation to schools, league sports, and regular commutes. That's it. Regular commute.
Encouraging.
Basically, it's like you can use the carrot to a certain degree, but parking is a thing that you have to start controlling if you want people to drive less. And the Veterans Park is like a really good example of all these league sports. It's like, why does everybody have to arrive in a separate vehicle? Why? It just doesn't make any sense. And yet we aren't doing anything to get people to consider, like, okay, maybe you're gonna have to park on the other side of the street if you can't figure out carpooling. That this is, we have to start taking action because people are just too wed to the convenience of their cars.
Do you,
And it's not making for the best environment in the park either, having all those.
so is the action enough to say incentivize carpooling? Or are you specifically advocating for a payment, like a?
Well, I'm saying
pay-
control access to free parking is, you're not saying you're gonna charge it. It says you're gonna, like, you've got a carpool if you wanna park here. And if you don't carpool, you gotta park on the other side of the street or someplace else. That this is carpool.
So you're talking about like
carpool
having an
parking.
HOV lane, you have a HOV parking area.
Like carpool
Yeah,
prairie.
you do it all the
carpool.
time, you have lanes going into Boston. It's like you have to
High
have.
high
you have to have
occupancy
multiple
vehicle can
people.
park here and
Right,
single occupancy people have to park over there.
right. Yeah, it's like little ways to encourage
Good luck
people
enforcing
to.
Have you ever been around a sports team?
Pardon?
Have you ever been around a sports team? You know what
Especially
happens?
hockey.
Actually, I was, I overheard somebody talking
So
from the sports teams.
Lori, is this on the same topic? Yeah,
this is, I have another action.
oh, okay,
Um.
I guess I'd like to keep it open as to what these incentives for parking are, or the carpooling, so that we're not so specific about just one idea, because I think there might be a lot of different ways to carpool or to encourage that. Would that be?
Yeah, there are,
Create incentives.
but it's like, there's the incentives, but by themselves, I think we're to the point. There's a lot of businesses who have done some things to incentivize parking because they had a lack of it. They didn't have enough. I mean, UVM and the hospital are really good at this. They're fantastic at this. National Life of the Vermont is very good at it. And they've incentivized largely. They kind of work with incentivizing, but those are employees.
Yeah.
You can do a lot of things
I
with
guess I'm just
employees
saying,
that it's harder to do with
Yeah.
people who just come there on
Yeah,
occasion.
I guess what I'm saying is it'd be nice to like leave it more open-ended so somebody else can figure out the details later. And so we don't.
Yeah,
Under the slow vehicle traffic by implementing traffic calming signage, et cetera. Currently, the state speed limit is 25 miles an hour. I know Burlington has been able to get it lowered to 15 miles an hour in Burlington.
It's 25 in Burlington.
25 in Burlington.
It's 20 by the waterfront.
It's 20 by the waterfront. I know that they've gotten low, and I didn't know if we could petition the state for have an action plan to try and get a lower speed limit for.
So
the
just a
city.
point of clarification, the state,
To get to the store.
Oh,
the state speed limit for an unmarked road is 50 miles an hour.
right.
In Burlington, the speed limit for an unmarked road is 25
25.
miles. an hour.
Yes.
South Burlington marks streets that are less than 50 miles an hour, which is most. There have been instances where the city has petitioned the state to reduce speed limits on certain sections of state roads and has been refused.
Yes.
That's all I know about the history of that.
There has also been an issue of, and talked to Martin about this in the state level, but 25 miles an hour is the lowest speed limit except in the city of Burlington that got some exception.
Mhm.
And I would love to see the city of Burlington to be able to get exception for areas, South Burlington, for areas, and I didn't know if that could be an action plan. Try and get speed limits below 25 miles an hour.
Below
Allowable in our
25
city.
or to set,
Below 25. So Queen City Park is a perfect example where a 15-mile-an-hour speed limit is still too safe, too fast. Because it's almost a one-lane road, but there are a number of areas where slowing vehicle traffic. You can't put a posting below 25 miles an hour.
there is a lot of standards related to how and when and why you can justify a lot of different traffic things that I am not fully versed in. You know, you have to prove certain things to be able to put a stop sign at an intersection. Like there's a lot of stuff in there that I'm just not.
I just didn't know if we could have a action item of striving to get lower speed limits.
Can we use traffic calming devices to achieve the same end?
Yeah. That's what.
For the-
Really, really nasty speed bumps?
For the resulting speed to be less than that, yes. But again, this is all, there's all sorts of DPW process and state highway stuff and federal standards and all sorts of things that I am not an expert
Well, it feels like it could be in there.
in.
You know, I think, you know, if you're really trying to encourage the bike ped usage, improve safety, like, I think a lot of times your goal is what you're talking about. So it feels like it might be in there.
Will it in the goals? No, well.
I think it's in the action that you. I think that action is like,
I can put like explore, I just wrote, it's sort of vague, but explore options for reducing vehicle speed limits.
Okay.
Cause that could,
Yes.
that is figuring out the lay of the
I
land
would
and
like that. Great.
In the goals.
in the action.
In the actions. And in the actions, it talks about creating city-centered transit hub to serve the needs of South Burlington users.
Mhm.
Is that like a transit hub like Burlington has downtown for their transit hub?
Bus station.
In concept, yes, it doesn't have to necessarily look like that.
And see a need for that?
I think the thought was to try to increase public transportation in South Burlington. So in other words, I could walk up my driveway to Spear Street, get on a bus and get over to City Center.
Yep.
Right.
That's the thought,
Okay,
as opposed to having to go to Burlington.
oh, I like that idea a lot, but I didn't know whether, I mean, we talked about also creating just shuttle routes so that there's a shuttle that goes up and down Spear Street or Dorset Street, and it doesn't necessarily have to go to a.
No, but if we're talking about sort of
Okay,
by building into the current existing system, you would want a bus that comes from Shelburne Road to City Center to come to the same stop or stop area that the bus that then goes to Williston
yes.
or then goes to Burlington would be, instead of it being 2 blocks away in a different direction. That was.
right, and we can start talking about the next sections too, this inventory and analysis. Right. has anything.
Oh. Under multiple user types, that's on the second page.
Yeah.
This was a discussion point at Bike and Ped. So the third line, we could say, while facilities on or along all direct major routes are needed, and this is for pedestrians, bicyclists, etc. The city also needs to ensure off-street bike and pedestrian paths. And they take out the word emphasize because it's clearly Bike and Ped Committee's opinion that we do not want to emphasize off-street bike and pedestrian paths over the faster, more direct routes on road. So complete streets, yes, along with off-street bike and pedestrian paths, but not emphasizing off-street bike and pedestrian paths because we're talking about multiple users. And multiple users have to be able to use roads. Safely,
Seems
safely.
reasonable, instead of emphasizing getting the bikes off. of the road,
Right,
yeah.
yeah, because that was the wrong message. Everybody agreed that was not the right message.
Right? Anything else in here? First couple pages.
When we get down to where the city recently participated in the I-89 corridor study.
Okay, let's do that.
It says the policy of this plan, consistent with the corridor study, is to retain physical space for these possible future projects, but not pursue them until other identified projects are implemented. I think I'd like to see there what the response was of the various city committees where the preferences were expressed, and the preference was to fix exit 13, make it a proper interchange. And there was only one committee, and I believe it was the Economic Development Committee that favored 12B. So the majority of volunteer committees and the Planning Commission favored exit 13. Fixing exit 13. And the safety improvements at exit 14. So I think we.
So to break it down one more step, is that what you're saying? Because right now it says that it would be doing 14 and traffic demand management before looking at 13 and 12B, but you're saying also to look at 13 before 12B.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because 13 gives
I
us the
recall.
biggest bang for our buck. because
Okay, add into that extra level of information.
Yeah.
So we have it.
Yeah, I forgot to look at the next page, but I actually had more on that multiple user
Sure.
types paragraph. So the last line on that page, separated facilities are, leave out more welcoming and just say, separated facilities are inclusive for pedestrians and bicyclists of all ages and abilities who may be less comfortable using sidewalks, blah, blah, blah. And then the very last line, they must also comply with ADA dimension and add and surface requirements. And that's referring to shared use paths.
Okay, so anything else on this page that started on the multiple user types? Ends with transit services. Okay, then the next one,
Taking public or not yet?
we are gonna wait till we get to the end, if that's okay.
That's fine.
Access management. Alright, air transportation. I did notice, and Kelsey, this is just like a check for the end. Some places include the word Leahy and some places don't.
Yeah,
So
I will check that at the end. It just based on the timing of when I wrote the drafts
no-
versus the
no
city of Burlington doing stuff.
Okay, anything on access management or air transportation? Rail? Charging.
Access
Let's
management,
build high-speed rail to New York City.
Check.
access management, I have a question about.
Mhm.
the general pattern on Kennedy Drive is a reasonable configuration of an arterial highway. For me, Kennedy Drive is a horrible pedestrian road. And
You mean crossing it or?
crossing it.
Cause I love walking along it.
You love walking
It's
along it?
delightful.
Uh-huh.
Cause you've got
Sidewalk on one side and
wetlands.
The
you've got-
sidewalk and the wetlands are all very nice. But crossing it and car speed and it's just, it's,
Yeah, but because there's so few access points along it,
uh-huh.
there's
Yeah,
actually
really two
very few
places.
places that you really would have to cross the street.
Okay.
And now that we've added a crosswalk at the most
At the
dangerous
most
one, we've kind of got that covered.
Okay. I'll leave it at that.
And it is, and Lori, you're right, maybe there's some aspects of Kennedy that's not the greatest, but this is very specific to access management.
Yep.
So,
Right.
Yeah, it was really built for, I mean, it's access to the airport.
Yeah,
um,
it's long, that's the
Yeah.
other thing, it's long. It takes a
Um,
while.
air and rail, and then we're at the end. Okay, any public comment or anything else on this transportation section?
Thanks very much. I wholeheartedly support making 13 a higher priority compared to 13 or 12B, sorry. And I believe, that the plan is to extend Kennedy Drive down to Route 7, which would allow for bus service to go, east to west. It would allow for a place like Kennedy Drive with, actual bike lanes and all of that, which I wholeheartedly support. I would hope that you could include that as a recommendation or some kind of goal to allow for our residents, in the southwestern part of our city to really have access to this part of the city and vice versa. And not just by taking 189 as a limited interstate connector. On page
I think that is part of the proposal that I-189 would become a greenway
Yes. Yes.
and on one side and the other side would
It would
become a Kennedy Drive.
Hugely enhance the city, hugely
Mhm.
enhance for, and specifically for economic development. I mean, that's where I'm getting with the bus and transit routes. If we can get buses and transit routes going that way, it's an economy builder and it grows
Yeah.
our local businesses and their profits. And so I just wanted to maybe encourage you to add that number 11 does more than just providing access to the airport. I use it to, of course, get to my work, UVM. But if I wanted to, and I have done it in the past, I could stop at the grocery store on my way home and then jump right back on and go home. So that's something that I think we should be encouraging. So it's a real circulator. And it is something that residents who attended the GMT meeting, where the GMT board, they were going to suggest that we no longer have number 11, the airport bus, go down Heinsberg Road, but simply go, back and forth in a circle. So it would go from downtown Burlington, up Williston Road, go down Dorset, turn onto Kennedy, go to the airport, go down White Street, and basically just make a loop and then go back up towards Kennedy and back, just because usually bus routes they run just opposing directions on the same roads. But what the residents at the meeting said is, we live off of Heinsberg Road. That's our only, public transit opportunity, and walking all the way to Williston Road is really not attractive to us. And so thinking of it that way, those creative solutions to make it work for our residents, who want to have easy access and a way to get from, the neighborhood off of Heinsberg to go over to U Mall, to go, to this whole, go to your store, Duncan, right? And that's what it should be. That should be the goal.
Okay, do you, I think it might be in there more vaguely, but do you want it more specifically worded?
This is another thing I'd be willing to propose some language and email it to you, because I know you have a busy schedule, or I don't know, I just put a placeholder in there for you to work on.
Yeah, I guess, I don't know where that falls, and the commission can weigh in on this with the level of the plan, and we include a lot of statements about improving transit routes, improving connection between Shelburne Road and city center with transit routes, increasing the need for public transit loop routes, shuttle routes along corridors, frequency in the Williston Road, Dorset Street, Market Street area. So a lot of things that apply to what you're saying are in here.
But I would really point out that we're unique. Other than Burlington, our city is the only city that has a loop bus,
Yeah.
other than Burlington. And that is a strength, and I would identify as a core strength and something to build on.
So right now, one of our actions says establish corridor shuttle style routes for efficient travel to complement the GMT loop routes. Do we need like some kind of additional like wording that like emphasizes how great the GMT loop routes are? And we don't want to lose them. Is that kind of what
Key to
you're?
economic growth. It's key to this, to the mobility of our residents.
Maybe we can put in like the existing important GMT loop, you know, something to just kind of like make sure it's clear that we like them.
Is that gonna be?
They serve our
goals?
residents well.
It's at the end of an existing action.
Yeah, I see it.
Okay, anything else on transportation? Oh, good.
Yeah, well, I have maybe 20 comments, but there's a number of places in here, for example, the first goal, it uses the specific language of shared use paths.
That's what they're called.
We do have some shared use paths, but existing bike ped infrastructure is more representative of the whole system. So because we don't just have shared use paths. And then there's another place where, well, there's a place where we specifically call out bike lanes or shared use paths. And again, if we're using bike ped infrastructure, because a lot of the recommendation boards like NACTO and small towns will often recommend other ways of incorporating them than specifically bike lanes or shared use paths. And so there are real design standards and safety differences in what we use. And we should really be not pigeonholing ourselves into something that is actually a lower standard than what's already available out there for us to be using with design.
I would say that bike lanes and shared use paths were used intentionally as different things in this this plan in different places because of discussions that I've had with DPW and with their other few pieces of feedback.
It's also the terminology we use in all the maps.
So, yeah, so what I'm saying is we should start using the language that actual planners and designers of this infrastructure use and move toward the standards that have already been adopted and have been implemented successfully, rather than using the kinds of things that we just assume are what can be done or has already been done. Because we don't
I'm not
really
the one
use
making the
those
changes.
standards
You
here.
need to address the commission.
What exactly are you asking?
So, when you say something is a specific goal, like saying to put in bike lanes or shared use paths, those aren't the only options for bike infrastructure. And so by naming those specifically, we're saying we want to do this specific thing rather than saying bike ped infrastructure generally, and then using something like a bike ped master plan to identify the criteria by which case is the safest to use, or which design standards to adopt. So there are NACTO, for example, the National Association of City Transportation Officials, has really great design standards. They did this in 2011 and have updated them since, because before that, we were using AASHTO, the American Association of State Highway Transportation Officials, and that is completely auto-focused. And so when we start to do planning or engineering, and our engineers use an AASHTO manual, we by default make other mode types secondary. And so both from the Netherlands conversion from being really car congested in the 70s to having really high bike rates, And a lot of their infrastructure design spreading across the rest of Northern Europe, Canada, the Pacific Northwest. Even places in the US have started adopting and implementing these standards, which are proven to be much safer and get people to actually use the infrastructure much more, which also goes hand in hand with our climate objectives.
So are you suggesting that we use bike ped infrastructure instead of bike paths and shared use paths?
Yes,
So just make that change because bike ped infrastructure gives more flexibility in what we plan.
yes.
That's what I hear you saying, is that right?
Yeah, with the exception of a place where we mentioned a specific shared use path on Dorset Street. But even then, it might be appropriate to still use infrastructure. It really depends on the context.
Wouldn't we do that in the implementation of a bike ped master plan? Wouldn't that
Yeah.
be part of that?
That is a big part of it. I
Yes,
think.
so
The master
That's what
plan,
it should be.
So we shouldn't pigeonhole that plan by saying that we want bike lanes. Because that plan might call for very limited use of bike lanes.
well, it's kind of weird because in here, I thought that the criticism that I made of it, and it kind of goes throughout more paragraphs, is that it was emphasizing off shared use paths. Instead of emphasizing complete streets and, you know, on-road facilities and things like that. And I think if that intent is made more clear, I think the rest of it, I think, can be addressed in the master plan, because that's gonna be very specific.
Absolutely.
So, well, it seems like, you know, maybe there's a reason for, at least in some of these spots, to change it to be kind of a more overarching bike ped infrastructure. But there are a few spots where I think it should stay the way it is, where we've already gotten feedback from the bike ped committee, like, you know, for example, construct and maintain bike lanes on all major corridors and also provide bike ped options separated from the road. I mean, that seems like a very specific one. We don't want to just get rid of the words bike lane. I
Yeah,
think we
'cause-
might want to keep that there.
And that's been pretty long-standing policy too, you know, it's just like, but I think what we're doing is kind of shifting more toward on-road facilities in addition to the shared use facilities. And because before the message seemed to be shared use facilities instead of on-road facilities, and that's the message we do not want to create.
So
So just creating bike ped infrastructure where appropriate, plugging that in.
No, it's
And
not where
and-
appropriate, it's
no, I'm
virtually
saying-
everywhere. You know, almost everywhere.
Well,
there's-
Jessica was saying there are places in this plan that talks specifically about specific bike paths.
Yeah,
And it stays like that, but
Right.
generically in the plan, changed to bike ped infrastructure.
So I actually.
I think there could be a reference in the complete and implement the bike ped master plan. Words to the effect that we should adopt the current standard that Ryan mentioned. It could be referenced in that master plan, and then we'd get away from.
Mhm.
And we wouldn't have to change this, but we would get away from bike lanes and shared paths. Terminology.
I would just emphasize that this plan is, as I've said before, a big umbrella plan that has lots of other little plans that are more technical and more specific and everything else underneath it. So I think that changing the term to bike ped infrastructure is fine, but a lot of the specific things that we're talking about would not be in this plan.
Yes.
So,
You have another?
yeah, I mean, this continues with that, which is the comment you made about how having bike lanes has been an existing policy goal. What I'm trying to say is that not every arterial is the appropriate for a bike lane.
Right.
And so I want to make sure that we're not running blind with assumptions. And that we're not putting language in here that says we should be doing this by default, rather than using real design and safety standards that reflect on things like the travel vehicle speed, the number of curb cuts, the AADT, and other factors that affect which type bike ped infrastructure you would put along a roadway and what kind of separations it needs. So I'm trying to get us away from really specific language and move us towards saying that we will move forward with actual proven, tested plans that we can require to be implemented in the city by design. And
I think Michael mentioned that, adding that.
I think we can get all that into that master plan. That should
would
be
be part of that.
It's in there.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
maybe you could. I didn't write down what the specification is that you referenced, but you could send it to us
Or,
Just the
you know,
name.
or we could.
and send it to, or send it to Kelsey.
Ryan's also very good at coming to bike and ped meetings. We really
Yeah, I know.
appreciate him.
Right.
His input.
Okay, anything else on transportation?
Whoa.
Time to go home.
Yes. Morning, as the lights are about to go on.
My original speech went out the window here. Okay, so recreation resources and opportunities, you know. Sections here. We moved on to recreation resources and opportunities.
First and second paragraphs, first line, replace humans with us. Enable us to exercise, socialize. Because a lot of us don't have chimpanzees and other things for pets that need to exercise and socialize, so just us.
Sounds good.
The third word,
Yes, more than just
And
humans.
then more seriously, in the next
Oh,
paragraph, I think we should distinguish between recreation and passive recreation rather than a developed park and other kind of park.
I think that is done later in the section, isn't it?
Well, in that first line of the second paragraph, I've made a note, must balance the need for recreational facilities and then active and passive natural is the definition.
Didn't we talk about this a couple weeks ago and decided to keep it developed and natural, so it was really clear? We wanted the word natural, so it was like really clear to like a lay person that what
This is-
passive meant.
Yeah, passive and active is a weird one because you can be trail running, which feels very active, and you can also be sitting at a picnic table in a developed park, which feels very passive, and it's not. Definitionally would be pointing the opposite direction. It's a bit of an like developed and natural. You could do active and passive recreation in either of those things.
veteran.
No, you can't do you can't do active recreation in the Wheeler Park.
In the common usage of the word active. Yes, you can,
Like run.
You can run.
That's passive recreation. in the
but that's not
definition
how
of-
people use the word active. They think of like, I'm an active person
My
because
heart
I go
rate went up
jogging,
because I was being active.
right?
I'm sorry for you.
That's that was part of the reason for moving
No,
away from
uh,
those
it's-
words,
it's-
as they were a
it's
little bit.
quite- Well, it's a serious, I might be flippant about it, but it's a serious question. If you want to have developed, then the passive part of it should be passive natural.
Why don't you like the word natural? Because we,
Well, I
we
wanted
did
to-
talk about
I-
this
I
and you were
didn't-
here for it, but.
Well, a developed park. I don't know what a developed park is, actually.
Veterans Park is
Yeah.
a developed park.
But athletic fields.
Yes,
you know,
that's active
great.
recreation,
Playground.
sports.
So that's a development.
That's a developed park.
But also a developed park could have a picnic area. Or a playground or a lawn
Yeah, some-
bowling.
And Red Rocks is a
Bocce.
natural park,
That's
but they have cross-country meets in it.
Yeah.
So it is passive, but it's active,
You're right,
but it is natural.
right.
All right, well, I'm trying to distinguish between something that's developed and something that isn't.
I
I think
think,
developed and natural.
yeah, that's why I was
Yeah.
asking, what don't you like about the word natural? Do you
No, I
want
like the word natural. I just wanted to distinguish between passive recreation and active recreation. And if it doesn't work, I'm not wedded to it. We can move on. And then there's another sentence, our residents use both our developed parks and our natural areas. I would just say our residents use our parks and natural areas and leave out both and developed. Our residents use our parks and our natural areas for recreation.
I think the intent, so my intention in that sentence was paired with a bunch of other stuff later about having to have both and invest in both. Instead of just parks generally, because if you say we need to invest in and maintain and have parks generally,
It says so right at the last sentence. The city must,
right, I guess I'm not understanding your confusion then, because my emphasis being that there are two different types of publicly owned recreational spaces in the city, and the city intends into the future to be investing in both.
yes.
Okay.
You're okay with that?
The current system of park, that's fine, but I still think both and developed are superfluous words. Because without them, you're talking about all the parks. You don't have to say both are developed and. It's use our parks and natural areas. And you're going to invest in both of them as well.
Is there a problem with using both, the word both?
It's bad writing,
Well, it's
put
only,
it that way.
well,
We do also have developed parks.
I know that we should move because Kelsey actually asked that we don't focus on the linguistics or the grammar, but if you don't, if I don't, I cannot work on these documents because if the meaning doesn't come through in
I
the
think
way it's
we're-
intended,
But I think we're
then I have to
disagreeing
say
about the
something.
meaning of the word parks.
Beg your pardon?
We're disagreeing about the meaning of the word parks.
I don't think so.
Is Red Rocks Park a developed park or a natural park?
It's natural.
But it's a park.
Yes.
So using developed parks is talking about something different than Red Rocks.
Yeah.
So that's why this has developed parks and natural areas.
that's why it uses the word both, because they're two different things.
It just
Right.
seemed that the sentence was unnecessarily complex. Simplify the language.
Maybe that's because you're an
Move.
immigrant.
That's because I'm and I speak with this funny accent.
Okay.
Let's go on.
Okay, let's move on, shall we?
Yes, let's move on.
Let's move on.
The
My
last-
battery's
The only thing I have, the only other thing I have. is section about park space.
It's 9:40 and we still haven't got. through it.
Oh, whose fault is that?
Yours.
Listen, I'm not here to spend hours and hours and hours here and waste the hours and hours and hours of time I've spent at home preparing for it. We're going to get it done and I'm going to have my say.
And that's why we went through all of everyone's.
We let you ramble there.
It's not that I hope I'm not just wasting time here.
No, and I think, clarifying what the meaning of something is important.
It's important, yeah. Last thing on that is in the last paragraph of that section, which is something I did before, change climate change mitigation target to climate action plan targets.
To be specific.
Consistent.
I've got something that I was going to bring up,
Yeah.
where it talks about a range of park sizes and functions creates functioning park system. And then it talks about the distribution of parks, while generally widespread, does not provide for easy pedestrian access for all residents. So acquisition of new neighborhood scale spaces must be prioritized in areas without existing park space. I think it would be great if that said that it includes the ability to have some commercial development adjacent to the parks to complement and promote its use. So you might have a cafe or a corner store or a sandwich shop adjacent to these little parks so that people come and they get their sandwich and they sit down and they eat them in the park, and so that it becomes more than just an isolated park, but it's a park that has the potential for some sort of commercial development that complements it and makes it a place people want to go.
That's growth.
No, it's not growth.
Okay, stand down.
You drank
the Kool-Aid,
I'm glad.
It's not growth, it's beautiful. It's not growth.
I would love.
It's not gonna be, it's beautiful.
Lemonade stands down.
Lemonade
That
stands
seems
down.
like a great
Yeah, no, I
idea. That sounds like
totally
mixed
agree with you on
use,
that.
super good.
Not one time.
Anything else?
Yes,
You got a lot.
on the objectives. I'll rescind what I wrote here. I replaced developed with active, so it's going to remain developed.
Okay, if
Uh,
you like what's in here, you don't need to say anything.
Yeah, well. Then provide, I put 15 to 20 acres of natural recreation for every 1,000 residents. We
How
have
many did you put?
15 to 20 acres per 1,000.
Yes.
And I would add another objective, which is to acquire land in the city center for a village green. It's a big deal with everybody I hear from. That's
Does it
what
have to be green?
I mean, we've got, how many acres have we got? We've got 100 and something at Wheeler. We've got 100 at Red Rocks. We've got 60 at Hubbard, and we've got 40 at Scott. So that's all, that's about 300 acres, all right? We've got 20,000. Yeah,
I think we're 18,000.
20 round numbers. There's a lot. So 15 to 20 acres. Yeah. A good target. I don't know if there's a professional target or.
I was gonna say, were you waiting for a metric on that from somebody?
Yeah,
Okay.
there's a little more legwork to be done on a sort of national standards kind of.
That certainly needs to be a lot more per acre for the naturals.
Do we, and we're gonna do planning commission comments first.
Is 15 to 20 acres a reasonable number that we could plug in there?
I've added it as a comment into my document, but I'm going to keep doing my due diligence with standards.
Sounds good.
I'll let somebody else talk because I have one more thing, but it's not important.
Anything else up here?
I got one more thing just before the paragraph before programming. Says development projects are now required to provide civic spaces and or site amenities when they are subject to site plan and or subdivision rules. And are those civic spaces open to the public or are they just for the development?
The civic spaces are more often than not open to the public. They don't necessarily have to be well advertised. But there's a difference between a site amenity, the general concept is that the site amenity is more for the residents and a civic space is because it's applicable to a larger like site plan level or civic, or I'm getting them all backwards, subdivision or site plan level thing, then it is for benefit of more than just the people that are living or working in the development itself. So a site amenity might be something like
A swimming pool.
well, I don't even know if that's one of them, but it's a patio space with a fire pit or something. Is more intended for the use of the residents, where a civic space is generally a bit bigger and more public facing. So it's not quite as straightforward as that, but it is
Okay.
related.
I was just, because a lot of the developments that have happened in the past have amenities that are just for them. And it creates this insular, these little insular pockets as opposed to having civic connection. And the last line in this says amenities that serve, and it says the residents / users of site or the public at large, and I was hoping that could be crossed out and just say the public at large. The more these amenities are open
It's mostly because so some site amenities can be like a rooftop or something that you can apply some level of balcony space. Like there's certain things like that that are just definitionally not open to
Okay.
members of the public, so.
And typically swimming pools associations really don't want to attract people from outside the neighborhood.
Yeah.
To use the swimming pools.
No, I know.
And you know, you can actually see in the LDRs, there's like a specific list of like what counts as these different things, you know, just to get a better sense of.
Yeah.
Okay, anything else?
I just wondered why we say that a large percentage of the total city-owned park acreage is in a single location.
Because Wheeler and Veterans Parks are very large and are in one geographic location.
Yeah,
So they are not walkable from for the vast majority of people. They're not bikeable for a good number of residents that you have to drive to them, you know, it's when we're saying a certain number of acres per resident. Then there needs to be more distribution for this to be equitable into other neighborhoods instead of having 300 acres in one place and calling it good.
no, I'm just asking about the single location because we do have Red Rocks, which is 100 acres, and Hubbard, which is 60 acres, and Scott, which is 40 acres, which is spread around all over the place. They're not concentrated. That's another 200 acres.
Right, but there's 360 something or something like that acres in location.
Yeah.
It's just
It's just
saying that our existing,
It's just-
even if our existing parks meet the metrics, they are not meeting metrics of being distributed, walkable, bikeable, and equitable.
I think that's why I think it's to support the action of the preparing the parks master plan. You know, to say if we're gonna have future ones, maybe they shouldn't be like adjacent to the biggest one.
They're very different kinds of park and very different kind of people use them.
Yeah, and I think that that's why.
Veterans Memorial and Wheeler Nature are quite different. It's not, I just wondering why, you know,
Okay,
we
anything
shouldn't
else?
forget
in
about those others.
The
No, we don't. It's
recreation
just the state of the
resources and
state.
opportunities up here? The whole thing? Okay, Betty, you
I
better
just wanted to forewarn you, because Kelsey's gotten a document from the Common Areas for Dogs Committee, and dogs will be the considerations for the presence of dogs will also be part of this subject or these areas. And again, walkability is an issue for people and dogs. As Kelsey said, it's a matter of spreading some of these opportunities out geographically, so.
I should also say we also have not received official comments on the section we had earlier on sort of initial subject level feedback from the Recreation and Parks Committee. They had not had it prepared in time, but I believe they met last night and I should be getting those comments. So this section may be updated.
Okay, with those comments,
Mhm.
Megan?
Just asking a question, because there's some of your audience members who came specifically to talk about the airport fence. Is that coming up soon, or they're wondering if they should go home and?
That would, I think we're gonna have to talk about that in like, as soon as we can finish this section. We're gonna, so,
I guess to it. How long?
do you have any more comments on this section? Okay, then we can talk about it now, because that's, or we can talk about what we're gonna talk about, I guess. So it's really late. And we have a bunch more stuff on the agenda, and I guess I'm wondering what we are gonna do about it. It is really late to jump into the future land use areas and map.
Yeah, what does our next meeting entail?
The next meeting would be the 27th, and it would be all the introductory language, seeing the document all together as a whole. All the language that ties it together and explains what the plan is and is for, pulling in the vision and goal statements and connecting it into this text, sort of making all the little disjointed puzzle pieces into a puzzle.
Can I make a suggestion? It almost seems like we need another meeting for this. Yeah, I don't know if we can swing that, but I think
What do you
we're,
mean for the future land
yeah,
use section?
I mean, this is a weighty discussion. And I think to get into it now, we're kind of short shifting.
I agree.
Yeah. And I'm sorry, I want to put you guys off. I want to, full disclosure. I want to make sure that, we're at our best and we're fully versed in this and we're not kind of going, oh boy, I want to get out of here.
And as much as I really respect the schedule that we have and are trying to keep, I don't think we can shortchange stuff. And
Well, I think we would still keep the schedule. We would add another meeting in between.
Yeah.
We would have
Yeah.
a meeting next week.
I
I'm
think,
not available next week, but that's just me, so.
This is Paul. One thing you could do is tell the folks from the Chamberlain neighborhood that we are not going to make any changes in the fence line for the airport. So if we just tell them we're not going to make any changes, that we had talked about it, but we're not going to make them, that probably will suffice.
right. I think that's not the only issue. I think the issue is.
Well,
the-
it's not the other issue, Jessica. I mean, there's lots of issues I'd like to talk about too, in terms of relationships with neighborhoods in the comprehensive plan and lots of things. But I mean, for the time being, if you want to say something tonight, you can just say, we're not going to make any changes in the fence for the airport, and we're going to leave things as they are, which is really, as I think Isaac Bissell told you, is the only thing that they will tolerate. Otherwise, I think you really will literally have a war in your hands.
Okay, well, we're talking about the general topic of land use areas right now. If we're gonna
Okay,
stick-
I'm just
stick
suggesting a way out of this for this evening, okay?
Okay, well, I don't
Well,
personally
I've-
feel comfortable
I've-
making a
Yeah, yeah.
big statement about.
I don't think that we had discussed it, but we hadn't come to a resolution but we certainly talked about public outreach too. But we had not made a definitive decision one way or the other. We had talked about swapping land and straightening out the fence, but we were certainly going to talk to, and Paul was very adamant about bringing the Chamberlain neighborhood in on that discussion. But we had not, to the best of my knowledge, we had not made a decision.
Yeah, there's no decision on any land
Yeah.
use stuff, like that's,
There's no formal
yeah.
application for
It
anything like
wouldn't,
this.
it wouldn't need a formal application. This is about
Okay,
the
so
land.
we're also not talking about it yet, because we're not on that,
But I'm just clarifying that
didn't
this is not-
start.
there's no request for rezoning. This is just a land use, future land use map discussion.
Which
Yeah,
we're
just
trying to
don't-
decide when we're having that discussion, but I
Right.
think it's too late,
Right.
I'm too tired to. Can we set a meeting for next week so that we can stay on the June schedule?
For the week of the 19th.
Yeah, the week of the 19th.
Could we, I'll just try one other option, could we? Instead of adding a meeting next week, could we add a meeting week after the 27th?
A week of the 4th.
It's okay.
I'm not
Yeah.
here.
Yeah.
Tuesday is a holiday of the week after.
No, I'm just.
4th of July, that's when we should be, yeah.
Yeah,
Is it
Lori,
16th?
do you-
16th, no
Do
good
you
for me?
think you could give us comments ahead and we can like go through them for you at the meeting? You were prepared to talk about it tonight. If you had another week, would you be able to?
I can try, but I am gonna be sort of out of pocket. So. So next Friday is no good for you, the 16th. And I'm gonna be in another state. And I won't be where there's internet. That's okay. But go ahead and do
yeah,
it.
Vermont State Parks, which is where I'm gonna be, don't tend to have internet.
They don't have internet either.
Between them simply speaking
That's
to
right.
you,
Yeah.
so that you all could think about it as you think through what you're reading. Could you give them 5 minutes just to address you tonight? or-
Do you want to say something specific?
Yeah,
I
okay,
think that would be.
go ahead,
Yeah.
yeah.
I hadn't planned anything specific to say. It's just that, straightening the fence is not, I would oppose straightening the fence, and certainly it does not conform with the Chamberlain neighborhood goals. And so That's why I'm here, is because I thought that there was an idea of maybe straightening the fence and.
Yeah. I think it's basically a land grab. They're trying to do something, you know, the council said they couldn't do anything outside the fence, so now they're trying to move the fence. So I think we have to be very wary. I basically don't trust them. If they say they have one idea for something, it may not be their real root idea. So I just wanted to make sure that if there was any kind of action or decisions we're gonna make, that we keep with open eyes, you know, so that they aren't trying to pull something on us.
Great, well, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Boy, you guys work hard.
Thank you.
Sorry to make you sit through that.
We're wordy.
Thank you.
Thanks for
Thank you,
coming.
thank you for coming.
Yes. It's been.
Thank you, Jessica. Thank you.
Educational.
No problem. Thank you, Megan.
So that.
So we're back to scheduling.
We don't have a day.
So the week of the 19th, is that what we're looking at?
We were talking about the week of the 19th.
Who would be here and during that week on any given day? Michael?
I'm here, but I have guests from California, from Berkeley, but
Paul,
Let me come to a
Paul
thing.
Engels, are you available the week of the 19th or no? You're muted,
You're
Paul.
muted.
Yes, I am.
Okay, I don't know about Fran.
the 23rd would work for me.
Yeah.
I think Fran said that he was gonna be out for a couple weeks in June, right? I remember him saying that at one
Yeah, it
point.
was something like that, Paul. I'm not sure. So I wouldn't feel good about,
Third, but.
I wouldn't feel good about the land use discussion occurring with a bare quorum of 4.
Yeah,
No,
no, I agree with that.
So. I mean, Thursday, the 6th.
Yeah.
Yep, Thursday the sixth,
Yeah, that week.
sixth of what?
July.
Sixth of July,
No, I
Um,
can't do that week.
Thursday the sixth would work for me.
No. We could hypothetically have 2 meetings the week of the
27.
26th, so could have the 27th and the 29th. We generally avoid Mondays because of city council and various other things. We also generally avoid Fridays because Friday.
It's Friday.
Members of the public, your beloved staff.
You don't want to be here until 10 on Friday?
hang on a second, Kelsey, are you suggesting that we do what we were planning to do on the 27th, we do on the 29th, and what we were planning to do late this evening, we do on the 27th?
Yes.
I could.
With the understanding that if there were edits made on the 27th, they would be bare bones incorporated by the 29th, but you may not get a full
That's
workover of the 27th stuff. Because I can still work, what I was working on for the 27th intro stuff and whatever, I can still keep working on because my preparation for what you'd be talking about on the 27th is done. It's in the packet.
Okay.
So, thank you, Megan. So from my perspective, having 2 meetings in the same week is not a ton more work from me and except you would not necessarily get edits from the meeting on the 27th in the draft that you would be looking at on the 29th.
So far, that's the best solution.
Yeah, I think that's,
Yeah,
because we desperately need another meeting to.
We need another meeting. I don't want to go with 4 next week. I don't want to go with 4 the week of the 4th.
so that, Paul, that works for you too, the,
27th, 29th, yeah, that's okay.
I have a conflict of 29th, but I can jettison that one.
Okay.
I think you've got a conflict for both, so all
Okay,
the options.
Okay,
and then after that, we have the 11th.
then we're back on
the
normal
25th,
11th and 25th.
And then the 8th of August.
It would be the 8th and the 22nd of August,
25th, I probably work.
Okay.
the 25th of July.
Yeah.
Okay. That would be one of the meetings that the draft would be static, so it would be more comments on the same stuff. So I'm not as concerned about a commissioner missing the 25th as I would be about the next 2.
So we're having the 11th and the 25th. Yep, July.
Of July. Yep, so June 27 and 29, and then July 11 and 25, and then August 8 and 22. With the understanding that we need to move this, a draft to public hearing, which is effectively from the planning commission's perspective, a final draft, like things may change with public comment during the hearings, but this is what you're putting out for official public hearing. By the
Public
end of
hearing.
August or the first week of July, first week of September at the very latest, so there's an off chance that you may need another special meeting at the end of that, but that remains to be seen, and I'm not gonna advocate for it. I'm just
putting my money on it.
just
yeah.
keeping things open.
Bet.
Paul, were you saying something?
Just that we probably should, if we can, wait until people are back in September for a public hearing.
Yep, it would, so Paul, the rules for the notice for public hearing is actually 30 days. So there's almost no chance that we would have a public hearing until and the end of September.
Oh, the end of September.
Yep,
Okay,
if we warned in the end of August, it would be in the end of September.
yep.
Good. So I'm not advocating for this at all, but we could have 3 meetings in July.
We could have 3 meetings whenever you
Yeah.
like.
I mean, I was just looking at the 18th if we needed to.
We used to have 3 meetings.
I don't want to
a week.
overdo the meetings, but
Yeah,
I
I'm-
feel like we can't jam what we're doing because this is
Yeah, I'm hoping
this
that
is a
once
big deal.
when the full draft is compiled and we have several meetings that are looking at the same things, that it will
Mm-hmm.
sort of end up shaking out that it won't feel like,
We won't
there
feel
won't be
so
as
scared.
many changes per page as there has been up to now.
I'm just kind of curious on this, you know, on the current land use, on the text anyway. I mean, I read through it and it's kind of, this is what it is, you know, like I didn't see a lot of change opportunity
There's
there.
not a lot of change.
So I thought there's not,
And that discussion.
Hold on, you're
but I was just like.
not gonna talk.
No, but it's like-
Thank you, everyone.
I have a question for you, Kelsey, on the, it's a,
You're gonna do
maybe
it
a point
tonight, but it's like, I don't see all what to do
correction
on that.
about the conservation fund being expanded.
So,
The conservation fund wasn't expanded, but funds were made available for maintenance, 5%. So in fact, it was not expanded, it was reduced. So in other words, funds available for open space acquisition was reduced. And the 50% funding is a 10-year loan from that fund to the city, and it's supposed to be paid back.
Okay. I will clarify that wording with Paul when he is
Find it, well,
less indisposed.
Let's do this.
Right, so we are adjourned. Thank you all. We will finish our agenda at our next meeting.
Thank you, Rick.